Everything begins in a noisy city, full of people and honking horns. People talk about unrelated topics and go about their daily routines. One of them, who was on the phone, saw a guy walking next to him, and he grumbled about how his neighbor looked, like a homeless man, wandering around. The man who was seen as a beggar was walking peacefully, but confused. He didn't know where he was, nor what those loud sounds in his ears were. Surely this place was not the old kingdom, where he used to live. He had no clue how he ended up in that place, or if it was an illusion. But if it was one, it felt too real to ignore, and to see those people. At first, even though he was confused, he needed to find out exactly where he was. However, he could barely think, because that place was far too noisy. The Emperor of Flames was a title that anyone who spoke it would die. Everyone who encountered him did not hesitate to call him the Emperor of Flames. He was also known as the Great King Yamra. The king showed no mercy, nor did he let any tears appear. He wore human form, but his condition was nothing like his appearance. Wherever he passed, only screams and blood were left in his wake. No one dared follow in his footsteps. After he became known as a god of death, he cut down the supreme leader of the dark path, Miram, to which he once belonged, and even the leader of the demonic celestial cult, who was deeply tied to him. He made a meal before him as a result of his strength. That series of events made Yammer revered as the pinnacle of martial artists, for better or worse. He ended up being known as the god of martial arts. Those days of his past now all felt like a dream. He used to believe his life would never escape blood and violence. He could also remember a girl who always smiled at him. On that particular day, she asked what he thought of her dress, but Yammer didn't understand. What was beautiful about the wildflowers? He found out there. That made her grumble, because he never understood what fun was, joy was, the feeling where one could relax and enjoy something for no special reason. One day, he might also come to understand what that feeling was. Until that happened, she intended to share her happiness with Yamra. Meeting the girl made him someone capable of laughing and crying. No one would imagine that happiness could be found in a peaceful life, even though he had always lived in such chaos before. Now that the girl of herself had found her happiness, she wondered what she should do. Maybe he could seek happiness in his own life somehow. He didn't need to be deeply passionate about finding reasons to smile and cry. He simply decided that he could live a life of happiness. For a moment, he felt like he was going through what they called ascending to immortality, becoming an entity and ascending to the heavens. After an achievement was like that, that was when Yolmer closed his eyes and then found himself naked in a cave, which left him confused because he hadn't ascended to immortality. Or maybe he had been struck by an illusion without even noticing it. Either way, he should hurry to get out of there, but wonder how to do it. Or perhaps he should figure out how he ended up in that place and find his bearings. That was when he noticed the presence of a large creature behind him. Meanwhile, a group of people had gathered to enter a red portal. If they found any suspicious activity, they were only to report it immediately. They proceeded with the mission to enter and return safely. That was supposed to be a classic portal, but it was too quiet in there. When someone commented on that, another complained because he sounded ignorant on the topic. In a classic dungeon, there are monsters smarter than others. It had been 5 years since that incident. In the past since, when the Zero Guard team was taken down. In such a situation, they had encountered a horde of monsters deep in the portal and were wiped out. But before they could talk more, one of them told everyone to stay quiet because a creature appeared lying down before them. They might attract its attention like that. The man froze. He hadn't even noticed its presence before, and suddenly it was there, and he wondered if a monster had been playing dead the whole time. Suddenly the team leader tensed up and ordered everyone to retreat immediately. He would somehow try to block it, to let his team survive. But then they all came across multiple dead bodies of class A monsters. It's a shocking sight for all of them. All the monsters inside had been defeated. They would report the investigation details later, when it was over. After making the reports, the people outside One of them asks if it could have been some kind of internal conflict. That happened. The leader replies that even if that were the case, it was impossible for a Cyclops to be injured like that, especially only with low-level magic in their beasts. Besides that, there could have been another guild that entered before them and wiped them out. All the guilds have been aiming for high-level portals. Recently, they wonder if there was a guild in South Korea that would do such a thing, clearing a dungeon so quickly before anyone could notice. When Yammer came out of the red dungeon portal, he was lost after discovering a few new things. He ended up opening his eyes, and Yammer was inside a cave filled with monsters. Around him, he wondered why those monsters, which he defeated with just one punch, were even there. But somehow he managed to find the exit and escape. The protagonist wondered if there was something in those ruins. As he walked, he found some clothes left behind in the ruins. He was in a place completely unfamiliar to him. All he could see around him was dust and destroyed buildings. There were also some remnants of bones from people who had died there. He also couldn't feel any signs of life or movement nearby in the past. Yammer had to meet with some fanatics from the demonic celestial cult. Those mages tried to use a type of magic considered forbidden by magical society. The power he felt in the past was very similar to what he felt now. Given his current state, he could purify the dark magic, but he couldn't just use abilities like that in an unknown place. For now, Yammer decided he should try to get out of there first, before anything else. He would try to go in the direction where he could, at least sense the corrupted energy. And so he ran away from the red portal. In the city, announcements were made about the awakening of people from the Korean Association. It still wasn't clear what the state of things was. Since the most recent portal incident in the United States and China, where 0 awakenings had been found, there were discussions about that portal. That appeared in Korea, in a restaurant, was the vice president of Yin Shangwon, Lim Soo-young. She served the dishes to her customers at the table, who thanked her. Suddenly a man appeared, and she welcomed her customer. In fact, Lin recognized him, since it had been some time since he had visited them. The man, the leader of the Awakened Association Baek Yuenho, greeted her. He asked her to give him a plate of food to start. Lin noticed that Yuenho seemed tired and asked if everything was okay. He then asked if she had seen the most recent news. By any chance, another portal had appeared in the land of death, and people were paying close attention to it. They were dying, while trying to mediate things between the guilds. And they were also trying to monopolize that portal, since everyone was trying to monopolize the portal at all costs. Everything was quickly spiraling out of control. People were going mad, trying to secure magic stones for themselves, and there had even been a significant increase in accidents inside the portals recently. The restaurant owner used some agreed because he had heard about it. For people like them, they could benefit from some of the magic stones. At least it caused the prices of the stones to drop as a consequence. But the constant appearance of magical beasts was terrifying, and it seemed like they were getting fewer customers because of the portals appearing. Yinho mentioned that no one really left their homes during such dangerous hours. On the streets, a man was also walking furiously, the same one who called Ayama a beggar. That was because another portal had appeared, and he couldn't take it anymore. The man entered the restaurant, and you asked him to calm down, since there were customers there. That also happened, because he had doubled his hours the last time. The man remained angry, and asked if they really thought his life would be wasted, like that since he couldn't do it anymore. Either they should pay him, or he would find someone else to do it in his place. He stammered, because suddenly the man was acting so aggressively, but the man cursed at him, because it seemed like the boss wasn't listening. He should at least raise his salary, since he was risking his life, or hire some new people to solve this problem. You stammered while speaking to Lim. It was time for them to go after Haeon. The woman began to mention that it still wasn't time to find her, but even so, you insisted because it still wasn't too late. She ended up agreeing, and decided she would return to the restaurant later. Because of the portals, people were becoming very anxious, and more residents were leaving the neighborhood and abandoning things That's why it was getting harder to hire an employee, and even harder to keep people there, especially the stubborn and demanding ones. He couldn't stay there. The man wanted to leave quickly, even when they just wanted to find suitable men to hire. Meanwhile, Yammer was walking through the city without knowing any of this. That world was totally different from the things he saw in his previous world, but at least there were some similarities. After all, there were some people with internal energy, and he could see them, especially a certain child, whom Yammer happened to pass by on the street. She had an energy clearly different from all the others. She had such pure energy. Maybe that child knew something. Suddenly a strong gust of wind appeared, and the child with Lim held on tightly. The girl saw her rabbit headband fly away because of the wind, and Lim asked her not to go far, because it would end up being too dangerous. But Hung ran after it anyway, because it was a gift from her father. When she grabbed it, at least she was happy she managed to get it. But then a car came speeding toward her, and she couldn't avoid it. Lim watched in despair, as her daughter was in the path of the car, and screamed anxiously. But before she could be hit, Yammer grabbed her and saved her from the car in time. He asked if the girl was okay, warning her that it was too dangerous. Lim ran to see her daughter, now that she had been saved just in time. She saluted thank you to the protagonist, not even knowing how to repay him for it, and he replied that it was all right. He was just relieved the girl was safe, since Ymura had placed energy in Heian to block her body's nerves. He believed she should be safe now. Then Lim asked if he wasn't hurt as well, since they weren't sure. Maybe it could go to the hospital together, just in case. Yamurin began to respond that he was fine, when suddenly a loud rumble was heard. It came from his stomach, and he realized he hadn't eaten in quite some time. That was when Hai-Young came closer and tugged at his clothing, saying that her father was a chef, and they could eat together. Lim agreed, just as her daughter had said. At least he could have something to eat before leaving. He saved her daughter, so she wanted to treat him well at the very least. He responded that it was all right. It was a simple thing he had done before. It wasn't like he deserved a reward, and he didn't want any of that. But after a bit more insistence, Ymura ended up accepting the offer at the restaurant. He was shocked, because his daughter had almost been hit by a car. He ran to check if she was okay. Maybe he should go to a hospital. But his wife assured him that everything was fine, because that man had saved her. She wanted to repay Yanra with a meal and brought him there. At that moment, Yu approached and thanked him for saving his daughter. He could repay him with as many meals as he wanted. He just needed to come in and eat. The girl commented, remembering. Her father warned not to make a mess while eating. Yammer realized his clothes were dirty too, and she had noticed that. So the chef suggested he wash up before preparing his meal. They offered clean clothes for the protagonist to wear. Those clothes no longer fit you, so he would offer them to Yammer. Since they had similar sizes, they should fit him now. Then the protagonist was guided to a bathroom that was bright and large. He didn't know where the well was to be at himself. The protagonist then looked at the toilet and told the chef there wasn't enough water, and he pointed it out because it was too little to use and wash his body. You saw this and was in disbelief at what he was seeing. Soon the man explained that it wasn't a well, but bathroom with a sink. The water in the bathroom was used differently than what he initially knew. Then, he suggested to Ymura that he use the shower first. But even using the shower shocked you, because he was really bad at it, and he was soaking the whole bathroom, instead of handling things properly. Ymura was confused about how water could come out of snake, and the man explained it wasn't a snake, but shower hose. Either way, it took some time, but you managed to help Eimer get cleaned up and thanked him for the effort. Then you asked where he was from, even knowing it might be rude. The protagonist wondered how he should explain his current situation. Then, he ended up telling them that he had lost his memories. Yammer said that he hadn't lost all of them actually, but he didn't know where he came from, or where he had been living before this. You could now understand the reason. He was dressed that way. It seemed like he came from a cave known as a portal. They explained about the portals to places that suddenly appeared one day. And until this day, they still didn't know exactly what the portals were. There were spaces like doors that appeared and disappeared suddenly. Occasionally, there were people who were sucked into these portals, and they ended up losing their memories. As a consequence, isolating themselves from humanity for a while before they could return. In severe cases, they lost the memories of their existence altogether. They could even lose their sense of civilians too, which was not uncommon. That's why they called these people lost in the portals, isolated ones. Anyway, you could share more details about that later. First, it would let Yammer eat before the food got cold. He thanked them, but he still didn't know how he was supposed to eat. Based on the colors of the food, didn't seem like a safe dish. Honestly, looking at that plate of food, he remembered the water from his training. He had received it when he was younger, and ended up using it. But to survive, he went through various hardships in his life, ending up drinking water stained by blood, pollution, and filth. Hung couldn't understand why he wasn't eating. But Yu-hong couldn't understand how people could enjoy dishes like that. She showed him how to eat by twirling her utensils and bringing them to her mouth. Hung also guided the food so Yu-hong could try it. In the end, the taste was spectacular, even with its strange appearance. The flavor was spectacular. You never thought he would eat something like that. In his life, you said. He wished he could offer something better than that. And Lim agreed, because next time they could do that, Heimer replied that it was all right. In fact, he would like to eat more of it. He ate a lot before getting up to leave, thanking them with a full belly. They replied that it was nothing. He could always visit them. Yammer then saw the notice on the shop door about emergency recruitment. He commented on it and asked what it could mean. They explained that it meant they were looking for people to make food deliveries. The workers sometimes made unreasonable requests, so they were recruiting new workers as quickly as possible. The protagonist asked if someone working could get a room to meals, and you agreed. There were some people who worked in exchange for survival. He remembered that. He needed to find a place to spend the night. The same was true in his original world. So that moment felt right. If he started working there, he could learn more about this other world. Ymira asked if he could work, which surprised you. It would be grateful. But since he was an isolated one, the legal procedures were complicated. But Lim countered, because this was the person who saved her daughter's life. They could at least offer some extra help, now that he also needed it. She had heard that there were ways for civilians to become guarantors for the isolated. You reflected on that, while his wife insisted, because it felt like a predestined connection. They could help secure his identity and employ him as a delivery person. When his wife and daughter agree, you ended up understanding. And so he agreed to become Ymira's guarantor, which made him thankful. He introduced himself as Kangso, shocking the group for being over 30 years old. In fact, he was the same age as them, even though they thought he was younger. The couple introduced themselves and decided they should speak less formally than before. And so, the two ended up talking and came to an agreement. Actually, the name Kangso was given by the girl he met in his old world. She hoped he would be someone who could offer names that would always bring a smile. He agreed she had no talent for naming, but she was convinced it was a good name. But Kangso ended up using that name anyway. And from then on, he would be called that. Time passed, and Kangso took the chance to do his meditation. That place where he was spending the night, with full energy. There were many things he never even imagined existed. Where he came from, it really was a magical place, full of wonders for his eyes. While meditating, suddenly Youth appeared, opening the door. He was surprised to see him awake for so long. But even more so, he was in the middle of the dark room, without even turning on the light. Kangso replied that he hadn't found a candle to turn on the light. So you remember that. He probably didn't even know about light bulbs. He showed him that. Pressing the switch would turn on the rune lights. Kangso was impressed by something so quick and simple, yet functional. Lim appeared, also surprised that the protagonist was awake so early. They greeted him, and Kangso asked if she cooked at that hour. He replied that actually they had to prepare for work. There were many things they had to do before everything else. So the protagonist asked if there was anything he could do to help them, which made you smile. At least he could rest a little longer. He apologized because you would make him work on things other than deliveries. But Kenko didn't mind actually. He wanted to repay the kindness they had shown him. So you asked if he could take care of the cleaning for them, lending him a vacuum cleaner to do the cleaning. When Kenko looked confused, you began to explain how to use it. That was a machine that sucked up dust using air. When you pressed the button, you just had to apply it to the floor and make it work. It wasn't that hard. But while he was explaining, Kenko managed to get himself stuck in a vacuum cleaner. His hair got caught in this suction, leaving them alarmed and asking if he was okay. He stammered that he was, which made Yusai a relief. After all, the suction power was strong, so he should be careful with a vacuum cleaner. That made you wonder if you could really handle using it. But since Kangso seemed determined to help with the cleaning, you decided to go back to the kitchen and leave the cleaning in Kangso's hands. He knew if he had to clean, but that thing seemed pretty dangerous to use. Maybe he could use a bit of his power to clean instead. So Kenshin released a bit of his power to gather all the dust in the room. After finishing getting rid of the dust, he grabbed a bucket of water. Then, using his powers again, he finished cleaning using the water. When he was done, he thought that should be good enough. He showed up to ask if everything was okay, and Kanker replied that he had tried to clean in his own way. Wanted to know what he thought, but you really wanted to know what he had just done. It looked like that was his ability he had just used in front of him. The protagonist replied that he was just controlling the water, but he was confused because you want to know if he was a high level. Awakened one, Hanzo didn't actually know what that meant, so you explained that. He was talking about people who demonstrated abilities that had started happening ever since the first portal opened 25 years ago. There was something called aura that could manifest powers that included telekinesis or even elemental abilities, depending on how proficient a person was at control. In this aura, they could be classified within levels of power. Depending on the level, their power could be even greater than normal. Since Yvette worked in the past as a gatekeeper for Awakened Ones, he knew Kangso wasn't just an ordinary Awakened. He had a lot of aura. In fact, he thought it was a waste for Kangso to work there. In the restaurant, joining a guild, and living as a hunter might be more comfortable. The protagonist replied that he had no plans to become a hunter, which shocked you, since he didn't know anything about this other world. A high-level Awakened was not much different from noble. In a way, Kangso replied that if that was the case, he didn't want to become one either. He had gathered fame and riches as well as honor once in his life, but he realized too late how none of that truly had value. That made you curious to know if, by any chance, he had recovered his memories. He replied no. In fact, he used to live in a world different from this one. But one day, when he woke up, he was in the middle of what they called a portal. After leaving that place, he went to that area guided by pure energy. Coincidentally, Kangso ended up saving Heian by chance. She was almost hit by an iron carriage. After all that, you could only agree and understand his point of view. In fact, Kangso wasn't trying to be deceitful or anything like that, and he apologized. He felt like he should have told the truth from the beginning. But instead of being offended, Uganda Crime moved, thinking that Kangso must have gone through many hardships in life. Up until now, it must have been very difficult for him to fall into a completely different world. The protagonist was shocked because you believe his words, but you saw no reason not to believe his story. After all, Kenshin saved his daughter's life and helped them out multiple times. But just in case, they would keep his identity as an isolated one regarding his awakening. They could think about that later. His life must be very different now for what it was before. For sure, time passed, and meanwhile at the support unit, an emergency was occurring. A woman burst into the office shouting for Sun Jinho, the support from the first unit. Sun Jinho woke up startled when called out so loudly. The woman asked if Sun had really stayed up all night. At that rate, he'd end up dying from working non-stop every day. The woman, the inspector of the second unit, Kim Mei, gave him a scolding. He asked what exactly she wanted, and she questioned what he had been doing. Then Sung stretched and said, it was all because of the case of Portal A0128109. He had no idea where they should even begin, to tell the truth. So Kim handed him something regarding that portal. After all, he was still supposed to be searching for the level 0. Awakened, in fact. The president had been ordered to close the case. The director personally sent an official document to resolve the matter. Sun couldn't believe they were really supposed to stop looking for the awakened. That infuriated him, not understanding why this was happening. Kim replied that it was simply the director's decision, even when there was finally a chance to find a level 0 awakened if they continued searching. It could be a problem to go against the director, but some argued that this was a great opportunity to make it work. If they could find us awakened, Korea could stabilize, and thus become a country on par with the other allied nations. Still, Kim asked what they would do if they couldn't employ this awakened. But Sung insisted they would definitely find the awakened. She ended up agreeing, because she couldn't stop him. When he was that determined, she would handle talking to the director somehow, while he would investigate things. Sung asked if she was going out to eat something, and she agreed, because she had something to do afterwards as well. She was going to have a meal with her younger brother, for the first time in a long while. Then she invited him to join and eat together with them, but he declined, saying he would pass. This time, he just grabbed something from the convenience store to eat. Kim herself still wasn't sure what she intended to eat. It just happened that she had heard about a popular restaurant recently. She hadn't actually asked yet where they were going to eat, if it was a popular place. She heard about it from leader Yun-ho, who recommended it. Apparently, the leader was quite serious when it came to food. Kim ended up agreeing, since it was him who had recommended the restaurant. Some were surprised was the one he used to visit often. The name of the restaurant was Spring Pavilion, with Chinese cuisine. Her brother, Kim Myongjin, had wanted to take his sister there for some time. He was excited to see the restaurant for himself too. He had been there before and ended up trying the dishes. They were wonderful, but it turned out Myeon was surprised, because she didn't usually like dishes like that. And she laughed because that wasn't the case at all. It was a long meal they could finally have together. Inside, she was thinking about treating her younger brother to something expensive after such a long time. The two decided to go in to see the restaurant that had recommended. It should be quite delicious. If he had spoken so highly of it, then the two saw Lim appear and ask if it was a table for two. She was going to explain the self-service setup and show them where to sit. She decided to guide them to the table in question. She also asked them to call her when they were ready to choose from a menu. The two sat down and checked out the food options. They decided to order the classic black bean noodles. They both decided on their meals, and Lim approached to take the order. But Kim almost choked when she saw the face Meow made at Lim. Somehow it almost seemed like he was flirting with her. It kind of surprised her, because her little brother was good at socializing. But that was kind of the minimum in her opinion. Myomi asked about her. Things could get complicated dealing with dungeons. She replied that in fact, things have been complicated enough to cause headaches. Ever since the recent incident drew more attention, they had been busy. If they failed to find a level 0 person to maintain security, then they were thinking of exploring the dungeon even further than before, and that way the association could rise. Otherwise, its image would decline. The director even decided to close the case to avoid unnecessary problems. But you should know, her colleague's son was from the support division. That guy was totally serious and determined to find the awakened. Miyamoto felt it must be complicated to live in his sister's shoes. If they stopped the case, as the director ordered, it might be easier. But even so, that wasn't really what they wanted to make happen. Both Song and she knew it would make life harder for them. Suddenly Kim was startled and turned around sharply, surprising Meow. She noticed that the man in the restaurant was emitting a powerful, absurd aura. She was sure she hadn't felt anything like it just a moment ago. But suddenly, she felt it coming from that man in the restaurant. It seemed that Kangso had detected her sense of aura and ability, yet he was still able to emit such power. In just an instant, she wondered if it was really possible to contain that much energy so quickly. If she wasn't mistaken, he had to be at least in a class guy. In fact, he might even be comparable to the level 0 awakened they were looking for. Lim soon brought their order with a smile on her face. She left them to eat and enjoy their time alone. As they thanked her, the food looked quite delicious, but Kim was very distracted Maybe she was just a little off because she was hungry, but maybe it was just her imagination. After all, a level 0 awakened here, of all places, was pretty strange. Suddenly, she asked if her brother was joking with her, startling Meow, who thought she hadn't liked the food. But she was actually very happy, because the food was wonderful. Still, in disbelief that she had never visited the restaurant until now, the two laugh and she praised the food multiple times, catching Kanko's attention. It seemed there were other people with a lot of spiritual energy in that world. Those two, and energies a little different from each other, but both had the caliber to be called masters. It was possible they were known as awakened, but you should stay alert. He didn't know when his energy might be detected. That was something he could investigate more deeply. Later, meanwhile, the protagonist continued helping with cleaning, using his powers. He still wasn't satisfied, but at least it was much cleaner than before. He wasn't quite used to living in that place, but he had learned a lot from the couple and their daughter. There were so many things he didn't know and would need to learn. But Kangso had plenty of time to learn his own pace. There was no need to be impatient. You should take another look. Those awakened seemed to be drawing his attention. Suddenly he heard a roar and ran off, worried about its source. Well, he looked, the one who appeared was you. And Kangso asked where that sound just came from. He agreed, and showed that it actually came from his bike. That was called a motorcycle, and it was a vehicle they used. It was the vehicle he would use for his job and deliveries. To ride it, one had to be well prepared. So Kangso couldn't handle it for now. But he could learn to drive soon and get his license. For now, the protagonist took the helmet that was handed to him. You explained that motorcycles were dangerous because they were very fast. So safety gear like that was necessary. Kongster laughed because it almost looked like a cavalry helmet. Then you asked him to get on the bike once he was done. Kongster said it was like riding a horse. And you laughed because it really was quite similar. But even though it was similar, it was faster than a horse. So he had to be ready. After a moment, you asked if Kongster was okay with the bike's movements. He asked if it was possible to deliver orders by driving that, to which you asked if by chance he was scared of it. But Kangso laughed, saying working in deliveries came with its risks. He couldn't cover delivery times just walking on foot. He replied that there was no other method to deliver things quickly, but even riding the bike, the protagonist felt it was too slow. And the sound was very loud. It would be faster to go to Yungen on foot. After riding for a bit, you mentioned that they could rest at a stop for a while. This was an apartment complex, so he could go there sometimes. That place was called the Blue House. Pointing to the buildings ahead, he showed the number of the complex they were at. They were ordered by floors, and each of them had a different home for people to stay in. So Kangso commented on how dangerous monsters might appear. But he asked how people could keep living in such a dangerous place. You agreed that it was a bit dangerous, but not enough. After all, they didn't reach the places where people actually lived. 25 years ago, even after the demonic beasts had appeared, the land was no longer habitable, and so some people left. But after that, people discovered the energy in mana stones, and they could use them to create barriers and keep the monsters away. That way people began to live there using that ability. Mana stones were like gems found in the bodies of demonic beasts. They had so much energy that the stones became an alternative energy source. Thanks to that, they were able to reach more advanced technologies, but there might still be dangers. So everyone should be careful. Setting that aside, he offered Kangso a drink because he must have been thirsty. The protagonist is startled by the noise that came from the plastic can, and Ray, replying that she could try drinking it anyway. She guarantees she had never tasted anything so delicious before. Kangso got nervous when he picked up the can, almost scared by the idea that it could be that good, but he couldn't refuse, because he remembered the moment he ate the dish from that place. He knew it should be great, but still wondered what this new flavor should be like. When the protagonist drank it, he froze from the sweetness that lingered in his mouth. At the same time, he felt his stomach being refreshed. It was like a light, a softness in the midst of a great weight on his body. After agonizing for days without progress, it was like finding peace. He couldn't even compare this taste with the Gongshan soju from the Ice Palace. As Kanko remains silent, you asked if it was tasty. Furthermore, it cleared his stomach when he had indigestion. The protagonist was clearly impressed with the capabilities of that drink. But since they had rested, they could get moving on the motorcycle. Again, Kangso asked if he had to drive that to make the deliveries. Now, he replied that there were other ways to get around, but nothing worked as well as motorcycles for delivering quickly. As he explained, that was because the protagonist was thinking of making his deliveries. On foot, you froze from the shock of what he heard. As he said before, deliveries were too slow and the food would get cold. The longer it took, the more the customers could get irritated. But Kenzo assured him there was no need to worry, because to be honest, he was much faster than that. But even with you surprised, he stopped to think about it. It was quite possible that it was true. When thinking that way, based on what he saw, if Kenzo was really above and a class awakened, Kangso replied that he could believe him. They could even do a test. You agreed and got on a motorcycle, asking if he remembered where the restaurant was. When he replied yes, you decided it wasn't that he didn't believe him, but at least they could run a test to check his words. He would ride the motorcycle, and Kangso could go running. If he really arrived at the restaurant before the motorcycle, he would let him make deliveries without it. The reason why Kangso, who once saved lives, was called the Emperor of Flames, was because of his ability, known as the invisible body technique. Just as the name said, Najima, trace of his shadow was found, and then he moved quickly and covered his target's breath in a second. After surpassing his title as the greatest savior of all, he also became known as the God of Death. Kangso, who reached a new level of cultivation, achievement with his invisible technique. This name was none other than invisible. Vacuum body technique. Hank Sir took off running and past people at an enormous speed. It wasn't just about hiding his presence when passing others, but above all completely merging with the surroundings, making it possible for his presence to be unnoticeable. It didn't just provide physical enhancements, but increased his exceptional agility. His new technique, together with Kanko's martial arts, produced this result that gave him the title of God of Martial Arts, and an existence even greater in the God of Death. You arrive at his destination and wondered where the protagonist was. He had used his enhanced speed as usual for that run. When he entered the restaurant, he found Kangso already waiting with his wife and son. That impressed him, because he really was the first to arrive. Lim said that the protagonist had arrived 10 minutes ago. So, just as he said, he promised he could make the deliveries without his motorcycle. Moreover, there was the matter of the awakened test, and you recommended that he take it immediately because he was curious about a class. It didn't take long for the two of them to head to the awakened agency. Even after telling him to take the awakened test, Kangso ended up more impressed with how many people were there. There were several administrative procedures required for Kangso to go through. Since he came from a portal, the assistant explained that she would help them fill out everything necessary. Kangso replied that he had no ID or address, and you replied that they could write Kong as his last name, and could also write the shop's address as his home address. It took several days to get all the paperwork filled out. Things were complicated and tedious, but Kangso was still being funded bad, and Kangso asked him what he should do during the awakened test. You replied that when it was time for the test, he would receive 2 beads. Electric energy would run between the 2 beads. He received more energy passed through them, the lower his class would be, and the more one could block the energy from passing through their body, the higher their class would be. In other words, receiving a high class depended on the energy of their body. Kong Su asks if it was a good thing to receive a high class, and he agrees. His life would completely turn upside down like that. Someone who could be treated as one of the national level treasures anyway. If his class was high, then he would have a comfortable life. If it were someone else that could happily dance in a situation like this, but now that he knew better than anyone about fame and fortune. Both were insignificant to Kangso at this point. Human desires were endless and came in many forms. No matter how much you fulfill them, there was no way to satisfy them. He got sick of getting involved in such a world. So he decided to live a secluded life with a child in a mountain village. He couldn't waste his peaceful life there. In that other world, Kangso thought he could control his internal energy for now. With that, the protagonist entered to take his evaluation, but then he stopped asking where the testing room was, which made you sigh. You would need to accompany him. It was on the second floor, and Kanko went up to the place by elevator. He used that box that moved on its own, just like the door itself. He could even use his voice to talk like that. He said it was on the second floor, so he should have arrived at the place. When he arrived, he met a man named Park Soon. He was the team leader of the second unit, responsible for his training. Kong Soo greets Park and introduces himself as well. It had been a long time since Park met with an isolated one. In fact, only a decade ago. There were a few cases of isolated individuals, but South Korea eventually managed to reclaim part of its territory, and that ended up significantly decreasing over time. Anyway, there was no hope for the North now anyway. Kong Soo asks what that mention of the North meant, but since Park doesn't reply, he just mentions they had just arrived. He would take the awakened test first, to check his strength. The trading he would do would help complement his results. They could go in now, and he approaches to introduce Kangso. The woman inside agrees, because they could start immediately. The protagonist soon saw what those beads you had mentioned were. They guided him to place both hands on the spheres, but he could not move during the test in question. Kangso agrees, and so the test begins. His internal energy resisted the energy of the sphere. According to you, the more he resisted the flow, the better it would be. In this case, all he had to do was control his internal energy. The assistant thanks. Heaven says he could now move away from the beads. As a result of the test, Hanko's class was F. Park was a bit surprised, but the protagonist didn't react. The woman says that this was a slightly better class than for an ordinary person. Ordinary people without abilities were class G before being able to rest. Everyone dreamed of having a high class like a Kong, so should have had expectations. Since he was an isolated, Park thought he should be disappointed as a result of getting a class F, and wonders what the level of that ordinary person was. Kongso was just thinking that he made a mistake. He wanted to get class K, which was the lowest of all. If only he had adjusted better, he could have gotten a lower class. Meanwhile, Park feels emotional from the protagonist's apparent sadness, even without knowing that. What Kanko wanted was exactly the opposite. The Awakened Association of Korea. It acted as a support department that handled the secret classes. It was a top priority, like a central point. The closer the department was to number one, the more important it was admissions. The leader of the second department team was in charge of the education of isolated individuals. What was truly important was how this work was handled. The reason it was so important was that I'm only isolated. There were several people who were high-class awakened. That's why even if they returned to their main jobs, their designated education was under the responsibility of the team leader. That day, the one working until night was Park, and its colleague Bach appeared. To Park's surprise, he asks what someone from the first department wanted. Their bait comments that he heard about a new, isolated person who joined the group. Since Park was in charge of him and Bake was still busy, he wanted to see if they could talk over a late night snack. Speaking of which, Bake asks what the class of the new awakened was. Ben Park sighs, for he was the first isolated person to appear in a long time. The department chief didn't really make it seem that obvious, but it actually ended up being quite disappointing. He was an F class. There were cases like this that appeared. Back sighs, because it was really a shame that this happened. Park agrees, since he was an isolated one, he would end up in trouble. It could have been possible for him to turn out to be a high-class person. At first then, he asks about Bak's work as well. He was kind of hungry and suggested they could eat some rice cakes. However, Bake was clearly furious for some reason, and he sighs, because he came all the way there for a reason. He grabs him from behind, asking if that was enough, when there was the noodle dish from that restaurant. Park complains because he was being squeezed, just for wanting something light. Meanwhile, the protagonist woke up in the morning, after a night of sleep. It was the 7th time, slot of the day, 5:50 in the morning. His body was more exhausted than usual that time, and he wonders if it was, because he learned many things in just one day. Anyway, there was a period of time when he felt somewhat satisfied. Day before that, after the afternoon education, it was snack time. He got involved with the rice cakes to eat and feed himself. The taste of the rice cakes, as well as the noodles, surprised him. He was confident that this world had all kinds of delicious things. Anyway, tanks are sized because he wanted to fight the exhaustion with key breathing, but it was too risky to do that inside his room. If they discovered that he wasn't an F rank awakened, things would end up becoming more problematic. To be honest, he almost ended up being caught by that woman who came to eat at the restaurant. That place was where they dealt with powerful, awakened people all the time. So that's why there must have been several people sensitive to the powers of others. Therefore, you should be more careful with what would come. From now on, Kangso wondered why things had to be this troublesome. Still, the containment. Education was more important than he expected. That afternoon, he decided to take his time to read and learn more. Park continued giving lessons to Kangso, talking about red portals and how many monsters came out of them. Civilians ended up getting hurt. Throughout history, the last war was called the Great Clash. With some difficulty, humanity managed to defeat all the beasts, but the battlefield ended up being destroyed as a consequence, and that ended up becoming the land of death. They knew where not even criminals could hide. After that, humanity ended up naming it the land of death. The protagonist now knew that was the place where he appeared. After the portal, if 2 or 3 more S-class portals were created, the land of death in that country would end up appearing again. The Awakened Association would not have enough strength to deal with them. Based on the education he received, the state of current Korea was quite dangerous. It was like unbalanced blocks trying to reach the top, according to the situation. Even the smallest crisis would topple the block tower. In a situation like that, if a powerful person like Kong so appeared, it was quite impossible for him to live a peaceful life. Like this, it might even be a selfish thought, but he still wanted to continue living a life. Like that he couldn't let anyone discover the truth about his identity. Kanko felt a refreshing and powerful energy in the building. It came from team leader Park Soon, who was giving his teachings. That's when someone appeared at the door, asking permission to come in. It was Park who appeared that day as well, to give his lessons. Kangso noticed that he looked quite tired, for some reason. That morning the protagonist offered some coffee, so they could recover their energy. That surprised Park, even though it was something he learned the day before. He was making cups of coffee very naturally. Kangso replies that it was because he taught things very well there. He offered a cup of coffee to feel less tired. When Park drank it, he was quite surprised because he really recovered. The protagonist knew that he was very passionate about his teaching, so Kangso put a bit of energy into the drink. Then he asked what the class schedule for that day was. He replies that morning they would start by experiencing the cafeteria, but that alone made Kangso anxious to see what it was like. Park laughed because he told them to pay special attention to the breakfast menu. So the two of them left to go to the cafeteria. That day, in particular, it was quite crowded even in the morning. Kong so agrees it looked like a battlefield. Seeing it that way, that made him laugh, because the workplace really was a battlefield. It was a good analogy, but not real. So he could eat as much as he wanted. You could put as much food as you wanted to feed yourself. Kongso asks if he wouldn't end up taking food from others who came to eat. Park acknowledges that he was a very considerate person. There was no need to worry if the food ran out. They had more in stock. The protagonist was impressed that something like that was possible. And Park explains that it was all because they lived in an era of abundance. After the recovery, Kongso understands that the abundance of food was truly amazing. But what was even more surprising was something else. In fact, it was the speed of distribution and the impressive stock of ingredients. Park laughed again, even though Kong So was an isolated one. He still managed to think so deeply about the information. It was all thanks to the work of the scientists. To be honest, thanks to them, they could eat different things every day. This was a time of recovery for the company's workers. Meals were indeed more enjoyable after a long day of work. Even so, Park preferred decent light meals for his stomach. When they finished eating, Tangso comments that the food was great, which was a great relief for Park actually. After a simple tour and the explanations that were given, they could stop the lessons for that day. The protagonist was surprised that things would end so quickly, much more than expected, and he wanted to know if that was really okay. Park noticed that he was indeed sharp in his observations. If they followed the original documents, they would have classes in the afternoon too. They would be combat training on the battlefield. But Kangso was F class, so they could skip those parts for now. There were certain conveniences for F class people. After all, in fact, it was weighing on Park's conscience to do this. He was omitting parts of the class schedule because of his pile of work, thinking that he was using the isolated person for his own benefit made him feel bad. But anyway, Park decides to introduce the training room. Since he was now in possession of an Awakened license, everyone could enter there regardless of their class. Any awakened person could use the training center, as long as they weren't a criminal who used their abilities for evil. But Kangso assures him that it was fine, which surprises Park. He wanted to be able to explain a little more to him about the place, and the protagonist thanks him for his kindness. But you didn't think there was anything he could really do. In the training room, then Park asks what his plans for the future were. Later, Kangso met with a couple who had come to see him. You asked what his class was, and is surprised to see that it was F. Lim comments that he originally intended to get Class G, the most common one. Then Kangso explains the situation and how he barely managed to control his energy. Pug ended up getting a higher class than he originally wanted. But you laugh that it should be a little better than nothing. If a regular person tries too hard, it could become suspicious. Kangso gets worried that it might be suspicious, and Yu agrees that it was in more than one way. Meanwhile, looking from the building, Park reported things to Beck. In fact, there was nothing unusual, except for his fast learning speed. But to put it more simply, he was very quick at understanding things, and he also understood how to apply concepts and practice after hearing them once. At least it seemed like they wouldn't have difficulty helping him adapt to the world. Beck agrees because the first unit seemed to find him particularly interesting. They said his movements and body balance were quite different from the usual. They even asked if the class tester was broken or not. Park replies that even so, no abnormality was found in the tester. They were absolutely certain that the protagonist was F class anyway, even if there was room for growth. He couldn't escape the lower ranks given his results. Maybe others were more sensitive about the matter because of the isolated status. After all, he was the first in a long time to have appeared. Beck agrees that, to be honest, he might just be very anxious. So he ends up just agreeing, wanting to know what more the future might hold. Then Park says that Kangso wanted to help with his friend's dinner. Meanwhile, Yu gives the protagonist a cell phone for communication. Kangso thanks him for the gift, even though he says it's all right. He got it from the subsidiary for isolated people and new resources. Lim asks him if he wanted anything else as well. The protagonist was reflecting on the idea, wanting more things, and he was even considering getting a new haircut too. He hadn't thought much about it until now. But most men there live that way. That's why Kenzo didn't want to stand out too much for having long hair. Lim agrees that it would be a good idea to make it work. She asks what kind of haircut might suit him, getting so excited about the idea of cutting his hair that you stare nervously. Anyway, she would prepare the ingredients immediately. Still, you didn't intend to keep buying time there with her like that, and decides to let Kanko deal with her energy for now. Immediately, Lim decides they should leave right away to go to the salon. It didn't take long for Kangso to leave there once he was ready. But when you saw the result, he really lived quite different. His wife agrees, because the hairdresser's skills were excellent. Even so, you felt strange, because everyone was looking in that direction. All around, several people were looking at Kangso, wondering who that guy was. He could be an actor or something like that. But everyone was curious about him. They praised him because he was handsome and had perfect model proportions. A woman approaches, asking if she could get an autograph and take some photos. He quickly steps in front and apologizes for the confusion. This guy wasn't a celebrity. He was just a regular guy, so they couldn't offer any photos or autographs. The woman gets embarrassed and apologizes because they thought he was a celebrity. Yu himself thought something was off, just as he suspected. Kang so asked why he couldn't take photos with people, but also didn't understand why someone would ask for an autograph like that. Even so, some people took photos of him and posted them on the internet. He was recognized as so handsome that he was mistaken for a celebrity. At the same time, if they let people keep taking pictures non-stop, it could become a problem. It would definitely end up being posted online, and things would escalate if people shared it among themselves, and it spread even more. More people would end up knowing about his existence, and he would slowly become famous. As a result, the peaceful life he so sought would never continue. It was definitely a future Kanko didn't want to have, so he needed to understand. The protagonist agrees, drawing a relieved sigh from you. He said he would be more careful in the future. Nothing good would come from overexposure. The next day, the three continued working at the restaurant as usual, but there was even more movement than usual. Thanks to Kanko, his presence attracted people, to the point that girls felt embarrassed. Kang-soo just worked normally, even with people calling attention to him. They also acknowledged that the dishes from the restaurant were all excellent, and became future regular customers of the place. From then on, he and Lim had to tell people outside that it was full, forcing people outside to go without eating, even though they wanted to enter. They were determined to wait for a spot to open up. Anyway, Lim asked everyone to be patient and wait, but it was a bit too much. After all, they were almost out of ingredients, and it would be better to come back another day. But the girls really wanted to go in, and probably just because of Kangso, they were ready to force their way in, when another woman appeared from the middle of the crowd. She introduced herself as Kim Jun, and she was there for a job interview. Lin welcomes her as the woman talks about herself. It turns out Lim realizes she wanted to join, to work at the restaurant. They had posted a job ad because they were in a rush, and she quickly seemed interested in the job. June agrees, because the restaurant had become quite famous. In the city, she was really eager to work there too. She hides the fact that it was also because there was a handsome employee and praises the restaurant. As they walked, Kanko turned around to notice June's presence. He recognized her aura when she entered, and it was indeed very striking. He wondered if that girl had a story behind her strong aura in this place. Those with powers were very well treated, especially the powerful ones. There was said, their quality of life was always very high too. Lim asked Jian to start by helping serve and take orders from others. She agrees in limp hands. Gives her the task of making deliveries around the city. He agrees and promises to return soon to help. At the restaurant, the protagonist leads right after as you ask Jian for help, but it was actually strange to her. According to the preliminary research, there should have been several customers in the hall. Kangso appeared a little later, asking if she was very busy. She turned around, startled, when she saw that the protagonist had already finished all the deliveries. The protagonist agrees. He went to all the nearby places during that time. Then they hand him more things for Kangso to deliver. As well, he leaves and returns a little later, when it was already raining. The restaurant had closed, and everyone gathered to chat. Kangso asks if they were getting ready for the afternoon. Traffic and Lim agrees, because they were packed with work again. Then June comments that they had a daughter, and Lim agrees. Their daughter was still little, and she apologizes, asking Kangso to pick her up from school. They were rushing with the customers, and she could barely prepare for the afternoon. Then June asks for permission, because she would love to meet Haeon too. She wanted to accompany the protagonist to pick up the daughter. He gives a wink and Lim finally agrees with the proposal. They could prepare things on their own. While the two were out, on the way, June takes the chance to greet the protagonist and introduce herself. Kangso introduces himself too, letting her call them however she prefers. She ended up surprised, because he was more than 10 years older. He replies that he just looked younger for some reason, but still, he asks why she wanted to work at the restaurant. After all, it seemed like a very ordinary job for someone with such abilities. She stammers and looks away, not knowing what he was talking about. She really didn't have much to rely on regarding her abilities. Obviously, there were no other reasons for acting like that. She just wanted to check out Kangso. Or rather, she tries to come up with another excuse, pointing to a girl leaving school and asking if that was Hyung. The girl waved at the two of them and approached Kangso, saying she had fun at school. The teacher smiled when Hyung introduced Kangso, then apologized when she saw Jaeyoon, thinking she was his girlfriend. The teacher recognizes Jaeyoon and asks why she was there, but she quickly silences her, so she wouldn't reveal too much. Ian was Sora asking about her guild tasks. June asks her to keep it quiet, because it wasn't important. Now, Haeun's family thought she was just a regular person. She was hiding her identity for a reason, and hoped she would go along with it. Then Sora says goodbye to Haeun, who also says goodbye to her teacher. Kangso would be leaving as well, and says goodbye to the teacher. The three of them walk, and the protagonist asks if the teacher was Yoon's friend. She gets nervous when she says yes, stammering that it was something like that. Kangso comments that they seemed pretty close and could chat more if they wanted. She stammers that she couldn't do that. They barely saw each other actually. Anyway, she changes the subject, talking about the rain with Hyung. Kangso asks the girl if the umbrella wasn't too heavy to carry, but she assures him that she could handle it on her own now. Then Kangso replies that it was fine. He just said it in case it was a bit heavy. Along the way, Hyung stopped when she saw something in an alley. Then she points to something and draws Kangso's attention to it. She ran ahead to show the animal trembling in the rain. Kangso asks if it looked like a rat, not understanding why it was lying like that. June says that it actually wasn't a regular rat, that it was a dungeon rat. Kangso asks if she meant it was like a magical beast. She agrees, because they were monsters that lived in dungeons, but they weren't magical beasts. Unlike magical beasts, they didn't have hostility toward humans, and they didn't harm them. They had the sensitivity to avoid natural predators. Those natural predators were the magical beasts themselves due to their cute appearance and the ability to detect magical beasts. Some hunters kept these dungeon rats as companions. Looking at its wounds now, it must have followed its owner into a dungeon, but ended up leaving it injured and ended up like this, in the middle of the street. Haeun asks them to do something. She didn't want to let it die. Kang Exo agrees, but didn't think it would be easy to save it. Haeun argues that it was still alive, so they couldn't give up yet. The protagonist realizes he ended up narrowing his perspective. He states that it could die even if it was still breathing. After a long hesitation, he ended up learning to value all life. There wasn't much difference from those days in his past when seeing like this. After a moment, Kangso says they would take it and bring it with them. June celebrates with Haeun. They could take it home and help it recover. However, the protagonist offers a condition, because it looked very injured. It was having trouble breathing. If it continued like that, it might end badly. Its breathing and pulse were weak, as if it could vanish at any moment. Maybe Shin could try to help bring its life back a little. June saw this, a bit startled as his abilities began to flow. It didn't take long for them to return to the restaurant. Lim noticed that her daughter was crying and asks, "What happened?" Hae Hong ran asking for help to do something. Then they explain what happened and how they found the dungeon rat. Anyway, he realizes that he didn't seem very well. It looked like something must have happened in the dungeon for him to end up like that. He was barely holding on to life, but Hae Hong insists they should save him. Lim sighed, telling her daughter that it wasn't just any hamster. After all, it was a dungeon rat, and if it was found on the streets, it must have had an owner. She could only imagine how worried its owner must be. Right now, Kangaroo says that at least for now, they should focus on helping it. You wonders if there might be a vet open right now. Suddenly, two people enter the restaurant greeting you. He asked them to find a seat and what they'd like to eat. That's when they noticed the dungeon rat in front of them. Yu agrees, saying that his daughter found it somewhere. The men agree it did seem to be in a critical state. One of them approaches to touch the dungeon rat. The emergency methods were properly applied. It was in better condition than expected. Fortunately, it looked like it had passed the critical stage too. He just needed to add a bit of his strength to make it work. Kong so had a feeling that this man was a formidable person, but he didn't know he could have such a mysterious ability. There was indeed a lot of energy around him, and he had compressed it into healing. The power within his body might be that of a healer. The dungeon rat finally responded to Heng's relief. The other man who saw it all smiled at the healer's abilities from the association. The girl praised the man because it was truly amazing that he saved the dungeon rat. Kangso realizes that awakened powers really were diverse and could even be somewhat miraculous in this world. You then saw his daughter taking care of the dungeon rat and keeping an eye on it. From then on, it looked like it was getting better as time passed. Then Hyung says that it seemed to be moving a little. It also looked hungry when approached to drink milk. Her father says that even dungeon rats needed to have their meals. Then he tells his daughter they should wash their hands before eating. Suddenly, the rat starts making noises and moving quickly. They were unsure what was happening to it. All of a sudden, Kangso asks if it was trying to say something. With those reactions, it looked like it was pointing to something. It was strange that such an intelligent rat didn't have an owner. Actually, you realize, as it was trying to point at something outside. Then he suggested to Kangso that they could follow and see what was happening. After all, the protagonist was faster on foot than the others. It would be better to check and see what it wanted to indicate. You couldn't just ignore head-on. We'll be sad that way. Kangso agrees that he could do this for her. Luckily, there was something that was bothering him too. After all, that dungeon rat had a strange energy around it. He doesn't know what he's talking about, and the protagonist says he could see it sometimes. But even so, he didn't exactly understand what it was. Then, Kangso tells it to point to where they should go now. He says goodbye to the others as he leaves, running with the dungeon rat. The protagonist followed the path to a spot filled with strange energy. It felt very much like the first portal he went through when he arrived in that world. But now he was sure there was a real portal. Meanwhile, inside the portal, a group of awakened ones was cornered. They were fighting against skeletons, wondering if they would die there. But there were too many monsters for them to defeat. On their own, they could barely manage to keep fighting. When only 4 remained, a woman apologizes because she couldn't keep casting shields for much longer. It really seemed like the end. But the leader praises the group for trying so hard. They were glad they could move on to the next life. With peace of mind, they wondered if they could be saved. If an S-rank awakened appeared, it didn't make much sense to keep thinking in terms of manga, pages and scenes like that. Only if they could have a high-rank mage, things would be better. Suddenly they hear the sound of a dungeon rat and don't know what happened. When they looked, lights suddenly began destroying the skeletons. They didn't understand how that happened so suddenly. They had been completely surrounded just a moment ago, and now this happened. They had also heard sound before, but didn't know where they came from. It didn't take long before more skeletons were brought down by Kangso All, because he hadn't eliminated all the small monsters before the portal hadn't closed. At this rate, he would need to clear the dungeon quickly before they recovered. He realizes that the core was concentrated in the heads of the monsters. It seemed that it had to be destroyed in order to suppress its regeneration. Kong Su finds the sword that was left behind by someone and decides to take it. He uses it to take down the monsters and avenge the person who lost it. Finally, he finds the source of the strange, demonic energy at the back of the place. At the same time, there was a powerful aura coming from behind that door. When he passed through it, a voice asked who he could be. It wanted to know Who dared to intrude there without its permission? There was no forgiveness for anyone who disturbed its slumber. Death was the only fate for intruders in its chamber. The monster lunged at Kangso, who only saw it approaching, commenting that it actually had quite a unique appearance. The monster became enraged because a mere human dared to mock it. It would cut him down with a single move. After that, Kangso only wondered if its head could also be its weakness. But the monster only noticed that nothing happened after its attacks. Also, surprised when it was sent flying with a direct hit. Thus, the protagonist defeated it and took his magic stone. This should be the true source of the powerful and unknown energy from before. He wonders if this was the so-called magic stone people talked about. The dungeon rat appears again, looking much calmer. Kangso notices that all the dangers of the dungeon and his anxiety have been calmed. Before the portal closes, the rat should return to its owner now. From then on, at least it should be more careful in the future. Thus the dungeon rat moved away and left, disappearing. Kangso wonders if Hyung would end up disappointed for not seeing it again. The dungeon rat ran to find the other group of awakeners. They really found that portal strange because it had many inconsistencies. It was certainly classified as a Class C portal. Even so, it was strange that Class B monsters had appeared. They really thought they would die this time. They didn't even know how they survived. It could be that some S-rank hunters showed up along the way. However, they thought it should be impossible for something like that to happen. After all, such people emit an enormous monstrous aura. If one of them had really gone to them, they would have felt an oppressive presence. But they felt nothing. So nothing unusual must have happened. So maybe it was that level 0 awakened. Suddenly, they hear the same noise from before again. They realize that the dungeon rat Karami survived. It seemed that little guy was looking for something. One of them cries, because he must be searching for his original owner. However, amidst the chaos, that guy who was his owner must have died. The dungeon rat approached its owner's body, realizing what happened. Then the hunters realized that the portal was cleared by someone else. Before it closes, they should collect as many magic stones as possible. The portal to close in 20 minutes, so they had to hurry. Outside, several groups mobilized to help the hunters. There was a reporter who appeared to report on the portal and the incident. They checked how many losses they had. In the portal incident, the dungeon rat came out of it, alone, not knowing what to do now. Meanwhile, at home, Hung was disappointed. Yu approaches, mentioning that now the dungeon rat should have returned to its owner, but she still cries because she couldn't see it again and was sad because of that. At that moment, Cancer returned and asked what happened. He says that Haeong was upset for not saying goodbye to the dungeon rat earlier, but when they looked, it was in Cancer's pocket. That made the girl very happy to see it was safe and with them. Then the protagonist says that its name was actually Karangi. It seemed it entered the portal with its owner, and they were attacked by monsters. It was too late when Kanko arrived to check their condition. He had passed away a long time ago, since entering the dungeon, actually. But if that was the case, who asked how he managed to get out of the portal? After all, he went and saw things and came back quickly. Kangso agrees that he did just that, which still surprised you. But still he was happy, because the portal was cleared in record time. You wonders how powerful Kangso could really be. Maybe he was class, just like the hunter Lei Shin. He had encountered several hunters while going into portals. Setting aside high-class hunters like Li Shin, no one else could invade a dungeon and conquer it on their own. But Kangso didn't have a powerful and intimidating aura like Li Shin. If he was intentionally controlling his immense power, it might be possible that the new level 0 awaken really was real. Meanwhile, Hei Yang was content, dressing up Karanui with little outfits. You sighed, because he really worried about every little detail. Even if Kanso was the awakened one, they were still friends. Even if something bad happened, he could only think positively after that. Since the group managed to keep the dungeon rat, they had to convince Lim, who gave them a lecture for the mess. Next day, Kangso woke up knowing it was his day off, and he wonders what he could do. Maybe train or look for side jobs. He remembers when he was with that other girl, who always complained, because he worked without resting, even a bit. She tried to stop him from constantly pushing himself when he could rest. Working when you should be resting was the most foolish thing to do. Kangso sighs, remembering those pieces of advice he always heard. Then he checks the magic stone he had left on the table. People that are used to use them for many things in daily life. After all, the energy was very similar to that of the celestial demonic cult. There was a kind of forbidden magic. In a magical society of his old world, they used to capture people and use them to create this energy. Kangso couldn't let a dangerous item like that remain. As it was, he needed to do his best to suppress the vile energy. Quickly, you soon saw the protagonist leaving his room early. He always woke up very early. Kangso agrees, but mentions that Yu himself usually wakes up early, and asked if he was preparing things for the shop, even on his day off. That makes him laugh. After all, he was the boss of the place and had to be working. At least he could prepare the onions in advance. It was rare for Kangso to get a day off, and he asked what he intended to do. He was still thinking about it, actually. Then you suggest you could accompany him to the library. So Kangso decided to go with her, without even knowing there was such a place. Various precious books were gathered there for people to read. Hae-young says she wanted a book, and he asked her enough to run and to return safely. There were many books, and the things that were excellent. You could take a seat. While Hae-young was looking for a book, an assistant appears. He asked if he could help her, and she points to the book she wanted. The librarian, Du Wumi, realizes she was looking for the fairy tale. She thanks him for the help after Du handed her the book. But what really caught the protagonist's attention was his aura. It was clear the guy was also an awakened one. He possessed a huge amount of energy for his age. However, Kangso still didn't know the circumstances. It seemed he was quite busy, even if he was initially below Jun's level. When someone had that kind of talent, it wasn't a waste for him to work in a place like that. Haim asked if he wasn't feeling well, and decides when he saw that. His reaction was too obvious. She agrees since Kangso was also worried that something might have happened. Then you finally turn and recognize the man from the restaurant. Kangso asks if he knew him and approaches to talk. Joe agrees because in fact he was quite famous. He was that handsome guy, even delivered the restaurant's orders quickly. And he asked if by any chance he was an awakened one. If it wasn't a problem, he wanted to know his class. Kangaroo says he was class F, which completely shocked him. Then he decides to talk about the things he was doing and the problems he got involved in. Kangaroo could understand he needed to make some money, but there was an age limit to enter dungeons. If you were an awakened one, he couldn't keep using his abilities to go there. Du agrees. That's why he needed to take side jobs like that. He also volunteered a lot to work as a librarian. That was because he could get school credits for it. He agrees because in fact he was a classy person. It was a mid-tier class, neither good nor bad really. So he couldn't receive any kind of sponsorship or attention. He wasn't exceptional like people such as Kangso because he was a person full of flaws. His mother was always having problems. The protagonist replies that his class didn't decide everything. He could just work hard to increase his class. In that case, but Du didn't believe that something like that was even possible. It made no sense, to be honest. Kangso replies that he couldn't leave things like that. He didn't understand how someone could give up on things so quickly without even trying. After all, he should want to get stronger and stand on his own too. He agrees that he wanted to get stronger, but didn't know how to do it. So the protagonist suggests that maybe he could teach him a bit. In that case, but there was one condition. There was a country that was curious to know more about it, so he would only meet him once he had information regarding that. If it was really that easy, Du was ready to continue like that. It was actually about a country known as the Elk Kingdom too. Comments that it was the first time he had heard of it, and asked if it was from somewhere in ancient China. He could research it for him. Kangso thinks that if he was moved from the past to the future, he was sure that there were records about the past of the kingdom. Somewhere, it could explain the reason behind the Ark Kingdom and what was known as magic, how they had the same energy even with different names. Duke decided to research it, only to realize it wasn't from the EO period. Then, he noticed that no matter how much he searched for it, country known as the Uke Kingdom shouldn't even exist. Kangsa realizes there were several other kingdoms with names similar to Uke. But all of those were names he had never heard before, among all the kingdoms from the past. He wonders if the Uke Kingdom never really existed. When he saw Kangsa become tense, Du asked if he was okay, and the protagonist replies that it was nothing. He was just thinking. In any case, he thanks him because he helped. Next time he'd offer him a bowl of noodles. That made you nervous, because he hadn't even done much to begin with. He didn't get the information he wanted, but he was certain of one thing. He hadn't just jumped through time somehow, as he once thought. Or maybe he had fallen into the madness of the demonic fanatics. In that case, Kangso wonders how he was able to end up in that world. At home, the protagonist reflected as he usually did, and remembers when they showed him something his grandfather had kept for a long time. When he saw it, he held it, hearing that someday he could have it in return. Kangso wonders what that vague memory he just said could be. It was about his childhood. He didn't want to rush it. Things would come to light someday as he searched. Then, the protagonist looked outside and saw there was a rat outside the restaurant. It was a man who approached the delivery motorcycle. Out front, he was thinking of lowering the motorcycle a bit, so no one would ever think of using it again. All because he was asked to do it, but he couldn't really be blamed much for it. At that moment, Kangso appeared behind him asking who this Sangwook he was talking about was. The man fell to the ground in shock when he was seen by someone. Kangso laughed. After all, he couldn't go around else in the moment. He got caught doing suspicious things. He wanted to keep his mouth shut very tightly. After that, the man asks who he was, and Kansky replies that he was the restaurant's delivery guy. Now that he knew that, he actually laughed when he realized how good that was. Sangwook said he was going to negotiate with the restaurant boss. Then, he could stop doing deliveries and go somewhere else. Kangso didn't understand why. There was a need to do something like that. It was because Sangwook was making money and felt uncomfortable seeing him with a good job. Actually, the protagonist thought that was a ridiculously petty reason. It only enraged the man, because Kangso was speaking to him so arrogantly. He suggests you could punch him to bring him back to his senses, but you shouldn't have expected Kenzo to hold his punch with such strength. He thought it was that man who needed to come to his senses. Then with just one move, he sent him flying far away. Kangster says he should go and tell that Sangwook guy be careful and to never try to touch the restaurant again. In any way, that's how the man ran off in a panic. Meanwhile, Sangwook was wondering where he had gone. He still hadn't heard from him since the day before. Then, the man came running to tell Sangwook what happened. Sangwook had been pruning his mistakes a bit, but now this was too much. He had asked him to take care of a motorcycle, but he came back completely defeated. The man bows down, asking for his words to be heard. That was because the store's delivery guy wasn't just a regular person. It was the first time he had seen a monster like him, and he even told him not to threaten again. Sangwa complains that he was only defeated because he was a weakling. Still, the man insists that that guy was truly a real monster. Bin and Sangwook agrees that even if he was tough, they just needed to teach him a lesson. It had been a while since they had a chance to work out. Then he ordered everyone to gather so they could check out that guy's face. Kangso was then called to make a delivery, and he completed it. As usual, Kangso's men were ready, with weapons in hand for the fight. The protagonist asks where they would leave the plates after eating, but they laugh, because the protagonist still hadn't noticed the situation. It seemed they would need to use their fists to make things work. They had heard that the errand boy had gone through trouble because of Kangso. Thanks that Sangwook got furious, and the men kicked Kangso's food. The protagonist asks if the man from earlier was the so-called errand boy, and he agrees nervously, explaining that he tried to warn them. But even so, Sangwook made that decision. Now the others come closer to see what they were talking about, and soon push Kong Sir to step back and remove his helmet. Then the protagonist grabs his wrist, surprising him with his strength. If a short person speaks like that, it would reflect on their superior's attitude. But Kong so didn't intend to let go of the guys who served him. Anyway, after all, he warned them never to try anything against the restaurant again. Scared the man even more, because his arm was being tightly gripped. Kong so thought you should return a threat in the right way. Later, he returned to the restaurant, and you noted he took a while, asking what he was doing to take so long to deliver the morning order. Maybe it was the order they received from a certain faraway place. Kong so responds that it just so happened those people were hearty eaters. They washed the dishes after eating and said they loved the meal. You were shocked that something like that ended up happening. Then he says there was something important he wanted to mention. Kangso asked if he knew someone named Gus Sangwook, and if he did, he wanted to understand what kind of relationship he had with him. You were shocked that the protagonist knew about that guy, saying he was the delivery man who worked before the protagonist. He was always lazy with his deliveries and demanded higher pay. Didn't even want to think about that guy, but was curious how Kanko knew him. The protagonist ended up having a trivial argument with him. Along the way, the customer who ordered the food was a certain close associate of his. Since they had a bad habit, Kangso scolded him a little. That startled you, hearing something like that said so bluntly. Thinking about Kangso's strength, he worried something worse had happened. A little before returning to the restaurant, Kanko pressured the men with his aura and knocked them down with a single move, shocking them all. They realized they were really in trouble after all, even with them begging for mercy. The protagonist didn't intend to spare them easily, making them repeat that they would never threaten the restaurant again, leaving them unconscious from the sheer shock. Kangso realized he at least shocked all of them, except the leader of the group. Then the Iran boy says that Sung Wook had said he would be nearby, but really didn't think he was, since he seemed quite serious about it. In the distance, Sung Wook just watched in surprise, planning to leave quickly. The protagonist had seen him from afar by that point, and running was pointless. Sang-wook ran off hoping he wouldn't get caught. At that point, however, he was frightened when he saw Kangso approaching. Even after all that running, he asked who exactly he was to be so aggressive. After all, it was just a joke, and he wanted to know if he was some kind of gangster or something. Kangso says that going in the middle of the night to pull a dangerous prank and getting caught, then saying it was just a joke was truly stupidity. Sungmug plays dumb after hearing those things from him, even though the protagonist thought it was better to cut the problem at the root. He keeps begging him not to come closer, visibly scared. Later, Kangso had resolved things and returned to the restaurant. That was when you received messages from Sangwook, which surprised him. After all, they were messages asking for forgiveness for everything. The protagonist heard about it. He said he promised to stop being so bad. He also planned return to his hometown and restart his life. It was kind of shocking, but he wanted to know if Kenzo had persuaded him. He replies that he just offered a word or two. You knew Sung-wook could be a bad and annoying guy, but in some way, he was still part of the restaurant story. At least, he was relieved that he managed to come to his senses. Later, June showed up to work, and you apologize for calling her on her day off. She gestures that it was nothing. She just happened to have some free time. Yu says his wife and daughter went to the kindergarten event, so they currently had less manual work to do. Kang-soo says that it was tree day, and they were focused on that task. That made Jian smile, because her younger brother was also going to do that. Kang-soo asks if he was interested in doing community service. They caught her by surprise, but she agrees nervously. Instead, she stammers that they should drop it and get back to work. She felt that. Kangso always made her say things that didn't make any sense. Who mentions that? Helion had been having a good time with her mother, while there was no one at home. It was a bit lonely in his opinion. In fact, Karani also seemed bored with Heion. There had been several portal openings in the mountains too, so he was worried whether things would really be okay. June says that the Hunter Association was providing security, so everything would be fine. Now the new kindergarten was also a hunter center. They were looking for powerful awakenings, and even if a portal opened nearby, nothing would happen. Sunu feels less worried if that was the case. But he had been working on portals for several years, and it was the first time he heard that. And he asks how Jayuna knew things like that. Immediately, she gets nervous and stammers that it was a secret. Meanwhile, a man in a car was grumbling. After all, he was called out on a day like this, when it should have been Juan's job. The assistant replies that she was suddenly busy with other things now. So she sent another person with low performance available in her place. You could tell she was specifically referring to him, which makes him sigh, not believing Juan's shamelessness. But you should know about it. The real reason he was there now. It seemed he still hadn't really checked. It was on the calendar that they'd visit an important person. As he knew, it was someone with great influence in the association. This was a great opportunity to make a strong impression on him. They were talking about the S-class artifact craftsman. Sayako the man asks if he really had to come all this way for that. And she replies that yes, he did, because she also had business to deal with there. He shouldn't have even checked the materials she sent before Hennessy. That truly caught him off guard this time, which makes her complain that if he kept acting like that, she'd be forced to report to June. Thinking about that made him worry, to the point he felt he might actually die. Then, the assistant says, there was a chance to build a reputation with Ko, to discover the identity of the still unknown. Level 0 awakened. It was important to stabilize a connection with Ko, the S-class master craftsman. As soon as they arrive, you should give his greetings immediately. The man sighs, but ends up getting out of the car and went to meet Ko. He introduces himself as Kim Hone from the Red Driving Guild. He had heard a lot about Ko from his father, and now realized he was Hetzel's son. Hone agrees, but even after hearing that, Ko just tells him to leave. He didn't want to be interrupted during his free time. As expected, Hogan saw that he was a grumpy old man. That said, one of the servants apologizes because his master got uncomfortable in situations like that. Hogan replies that it was fine, but as expected, things got messy. But even though Jiwon knew that from the start, he wonders why she sent him there. At a time like this, when they needed her the most, she sent her brother to handle it. Actually, at the moment, Jiwon had kind of become a fangirl. At home, Kangso had prepared small wooden bunny doll for Haeon. It was made of wood for her to carry with her, which made her really happy. But she had no idea that her doll would end up breaking along the way, and she would cry in kindergarten, leaving the others not knowing what to do. The other children apologized because they ended up breaking something important to her. And from a distance, Siyu saw that before he could approach. She was crying because something important had broken. Siyu approached to help Hayo and offered to fix it. There was nothing an old man like him couldn't do. When he saw the bunny's shape, he started wondering who had made something like that for her. Then, Siyu tells Unsik to take a look at the valuable item. He found it would require delicate woodwork to create something like that. Even Seo would have difficulty making something so smooth and challenging. He compliments the person who made Hyam's bunny, saying they were talented. She agrees because she really liked Kangso a lot too. In that case, he quickly used his skill and restored it to its original wooden form. She thanks him for what he did, and Hoan saw that from a distance. In the end, he was a peculiar guy who helped children too. Then he had a good idea, because he could pass that on to their team. They would be changing the way they recruited. Master Seo Chihil. Recently on the day, Kanker received his subsidiary as an isolated. He went to the bakery. He went to eat the most delicious cake. In the city center, Hang So entered the bakery to check if the cake was still available. Then he wonders if all the cakes were really sold out. The baker agrees, saying he had just finished selling them recently, but there was still one set aside, just for the protagonist to eat. As expected, the protagonist was happy, because he could count on that, and he thanks him, to which the baker asks him to store it well in the fridge in case he doesn't eat it. Now Kangaroo starts to leave, and crosses paths with another person. The woman enters the bakery to place her order. The baker gets nervous upon seeing her, commenting that it was indeed a good day for a picnic. Meanwhile, the protagonists simply return home as usual. Kangso fed Kurani as usual, but he was still hungry, which made him say to wait until the next day, so they could all eat together. That night, Kurani sneaked out to eat in secret. Soon, Kangso showed up to apprehend the nighttime food thief. The next day, the protagonist sighed at such behavior. You laughed, asking if he really managed to eat something that big. On his own, even with his denial. The protagonist believed it really was karangi. Then you greet someone who enters the restaurant. Is surprised to see cook, who greets the group during his visit. He gives just for a casual drink. The day could turn into a longer conversation. Still, he asked what was wrong because his face looked odd. Hick wanted to know how. He confessed his feelings to his wife. Then Baker Hick says, the person he was interested in was a customer at his shop. She was beautiful and had a kind personality. He had been in love with her for 3 months, but he really didn't know what to do if he confessed. He feared making her uncomfortable. He wasn't confident, like Kong, so much less in looks and personality. Therefore, he never thought he could confess to Jean. You continue, saying that none of that should matter when confessing. It didn't take long before both of them got drunk and collapsed onto the table. You sigh because he drank so much. You should go home and sleep. Kangso gets up, suggesting he could offer his room for him to sleep in. It was all fine since he could pay back the cake. This way they put Truck to sleep. Kanko spent some time meditating, just when Kurohane showed up to get his attention. For some reason, when he went out, he headed to the fridge to see who was stealing the food. But little did he know that opening the fridge would lead to finding a fairy eating his cake. The next day, Kangso questioned her about it. With everyone else gathered, she introduces herself as docent, apologizing for doing something bad. You mentions that a flower spirit entering his kitchen was strange hit her. They usually only ate flowers or honey. Text says, maybe she was drawn in by the honey in the cake. Pang so asked about these flower spirits, and they explained the spirits were a species that normally lived inside portals. They were creatures that crossed worlds. After portals opened, the magical beasts were exterminated, but there were others like spirits. Those that were like spirits but didn't harm humans, could even help them. They naturally got involved with the world and ended up staying. Kangso asks if they were talking about creatures like Karangi, and Yu agrees, even if there were occasionally some malicious ones. Those that posed no danger were species like fairies. Then Kangso decides he would forgive Dashin, as long as she didn't steal food again. She promises she wouldn't do it. She was just working because she felt hungry. Yu realizes that she must be wanting to find a job, or something like that. Even Lim didn't know how a flower spirit could help. In a Chinese restaurant, KUC suggests she could work in a shop. But Yu feels like they were just passing on responsibility. Kangso replies that in exchange, he could help with Hex workouts. Immediately Lim agrees. Because a well-built body was always a good thing. It definitely made a girl's heart beat faster. Huck ends up agreeing, asking for his help. In his current state, where he hadn't taken care of himself for a long time, he felt a bit embarrassed about his own situation. Now the protagonist says that in due time, they could make it happen, especially now that they had a co-worker to rely on during such times. So they made a deal and concluded they would help each other. A little later, Lin went out with Kangso and Yu into the city. The protagonist grew curious why they were keeping the outing a secret from Yu and his daughter, and she explains that in fact, the day after the next was Yu's birthday. That's why she was planning to keep everything a secret. Lin wanted to buy a present, but she was never good at choosing things like that. June agrees, eager to help her get what she wanted, even though she had never done anything like that, even with her friends. She was quite excited. Besides, she was accompanied by Kangso. Yuma Shun there felt like a date. That being so, Lim asked Kangso to keep it a secret from everyone. They will buy the presents and choose to hide them in his room. The protagonist agrees with the plan to make the surprise. Still, he asks what exactly they were going to buy. She replies that she was considering buying something, like shoes, but it didn't seem like he usually wore them that often. June suggests they could buy supplements. She thought their boss seemed a bit tired recently. His wife agrees, because it seemed like a gift that made sense. The two keep chatting, until Kangso notices some people staring at them, and then says, it might be better if he went back earlier. Lim objects that she didn't want him to feel left out like that. So she offers him a disguise with sunglasses and a cap. That way they could try to hide his beauty and avoid drawing too much attention. The group keeps walking through the store until suddenly a scream grabs their attention. It was people shouting for help because irregulars had appeared. Then a voice announces to all customers to remain calm and to not move from where they were to avoid a big commotion. Kangso doesn't know what was going on. Then Jimin says they were referring to people who committed crimes using awakened powers. It seemed that not all awakenings emitted strange magic. Kangso wonders if the energy he was feeling was coming from the commotion. Now, it was a little strange. After all the security barrier had been activated, no one could leave except the awakenings. Who activated the barrier? The protagonist suggests that the thieves might know how to exploit the barrier, and she agrees, saying the real goal could be to shift focus from something else. Maybe they were after something else instead of that small group. Kangso asks if there were magic stones in the building's basement. She agrees. In a big shopping mall like this, they were probably selling magic stones. But since the security system was working, things should be under control. June tried to argue, but Lim was feeling a bit nervous. She thought it would be too late by the time she went to pick up her daughter from kindergarten. She also couldn't connect or make any phone calls. The protagonist sighs when he realizes he had no choice but to help, so he asks June to stay with Lind because he'd be back soon. He gave an excuse that he needed to step out for a moment, and she agrees. Though surprised, Kangso ran off and found a hallway full of bodies. He managed to prevent the men from dying, but all of them were in critical condition. When he turned around, he saw several men in black inside a room. The leader tells the others to hurry up and get things done quickly. The only person Kangso could feel magical energy from was the man with the sword. After wondering what he should do, he quickly enters the room and takes out 3 of them. Now, if there was something he needed to know in there, he'd eventually find out. Maybe he should leave the rest of the problems to the association. Outside, they were talking about the men in black, targeting the magic stones. The woman says to arrest everyone involved with the jewelry store who tried to steal. The other 2 should go after the people who were in the basement. They get ready and enter the room, ordering everyone not to move because they were under arrest, but they're surprised because all the men were unconscious. It looked like someone else had shown up earlier and taken care of the thieves for them. Meanwhile, Kangser returned to the restaurant and mentioned how Yu had been working hard, but since it was his birthday, he could take the day to rest. He doesn't understand what was so special about birthdays. Still, for the people there, it wasn't just an ordinary day. That's when Lim and Hayan appeared to congratulate you. Not just them, but Huck and Gion also showed up to celebrate the birthday. It moved you because they had all prepared a surprise party for him. They hurried to blow out the candles and wipe away his tears. Time passed, and then came Children's Day. You agreed it was a holiday and wanted to say it was good for business. Kangso agreed that he had read a book about Children's Day. In that case, he was planning to watch a show with Hien. In the afternoon, they could keep selling until snack time, but he didn't know what they would do, considering Gion hadn't shown up. Kangso replies that that's why he called someone to fill in. Then someone showed up at the restaurant just in time, as they were being mentioned. That person was Du, who was quite happy to be getting new jobs. He didn't even hesitate to immediately show all the required documents, ready to start by washing his hands and cleaning the dishes. Since he was an awakened, he could work faster. Kangster said it seemed like Du was always training to get better, while also delivering newspapers that very morning. The protagonist says that even an awakened would get stronger by training every day. Otherwise, they would stay in the same place. And Yu wonders about June. As a ranked G awakened, she worked better than a ranked C boy like Du. Meanwhile, June was in the car with Hyun, heading to their destination. As mentioned when she arrived, she was supposed to greet the president and also the association director, then build connections with other guild executives. She asks about her father, and Jean says he mentioned he would stop by briefly. June sighs. It was expected that her father would be quite busy. While talking, she realized it was Children's Day. On a day like this, maybe she shouldn't even be there. Really? She thought her red outfit and makeup were too bold. Jean responds that the color was the symbol of the Red Dragon Guild, so she could handle it. There were many kids hoping to join the guild too. Still, June rumbles that they always had problems with portals, and yet still wanted to talk about dreams and hopes. Like that. This was a precarious and poorly balanced world, at its peak at that Jin's age. She was the idol of the Red Dragon Guild, known as the Crimson Pink Black Witch, that even made her smudge the lipstick she was applying. Jin continues, saying that it was expected for a rank awakened to be like that, drawing attention like she did. So she shouldn't think so negatively about things. She just wanted people not to underestimate her, because she was a woman. So now, the heavy makeup and all of that was part of brand. Then Jin asked if her new hobby as a new identity was something she liked. She stammers that it was all just work, to protect civilians. All for emergency situations, nothing more, which was actually a real relief for Jin. After all, she had found interest in something outside the guild, and work. Finally, they arrived and immediately got out of the car. It had been a while since Jin lived as just a hunter. Meanwhile, the protagonist was walking with Du and Haeon. The festival. They noticed there was a knife-throwing competition. Their Kangso wonders if some kind of assassin group was competing in broad daylight. Then he realizes it was actually just a throwing game. The more balloons hit with the throws, the higher the score. Haeon comments on how there was a big teddy bear as a prize. Kangso asked if she wanted it, and she agrees. After all, she wouldn't even need to eat any more with that. He asked about the chocolates and other sweets. She liked making Haeon hesitate, but she still wanted to eat the snacks and chocolates. Kangso made then. The protagonist asks if Du would like to give it a try. There might be a chance to get a bit closer to her. Du replies he would like a try, but being an awakened, his ability wasn't very useful. That's because he had an explosive ability, just a C rank 1. So it wasn't very powerful in situations like this. He could create a small explosion, enough to blind some monsters. It was pretty useless in everyday life, to be honest. Even so, Kangso insists that he could give it a try. He needed to try throwing the way he was told to. Kangso asks for 3 darts from the stall person, and then hands them. To Du, he says that to win the teddy bear, he would have to hit all 3 balloons. And on top of that, they were the ones worth 100 points each. It seemed impossible. Kangsu asks him to listen carefully. First, it was important to focus on weight strength. If his weight swung, the center of the object he was throwing would go off course. He should just keep his shoulders and wrists light, and his gaze always high. The last important thing was to concentrate. So Du does that and throws. Get the first balloon and celebrate it. Impressed that it worked. It didn't take long for them to win the teddy bear. For Haeon, who was very happy. Then an announcement came. That Wukong Keel's magic show would begin soon. Those who wanted to watch should just take their seats and enjoy. Haeon ran off for them to go watch the magic show. Quickly, Kangster smiled and asked her to go slowly, Du following after her as well. Meanwhile, 2 men in black were talking near the stage. One of them was worried because at this rate, they would be in danger. The other retorts that they couldn't do anything more than this. When the delivery comes from above, then they should just follow it. Otherwise, they might risk losing their lives on their own. If they couldn't kill those guys, it would be their heads on the line. The other asks what would happen if they got caught. And he retorts that you shouldn't even worry about something like that. With a rank artifact he acquired, they wouldn't be detected by awakened ones. The man sized their target was the blood flower, and they had to prepare. They confirmed the target and prepared their weapons to shoot. The true identity of the blood flower was Jian, the Witch of Scarlet Flames. Meanwhile, Haeon was calling for the others to get good seats. Do asked if they should take them from that spot. They could have a good view. Kangso was curious about the levitation trick and asked if he could do it too. As Do looked a bit shocked, he decides to drop the question. Then, Do mentions the trick where they cut a person in half. Then, they put them back together. And was very fascinating to watch. Protagonist wonders if he could get compensation for something like that. Especially putting a body back together seemed insane too. Kangso Bendo says that even knowing it's a trick, it's still fun to watch. Kangso then suddenly feels a familiar energy. As he turns around, it seemed to be Jean, and it didn't take long for him to turn toward where she was demotes. That sieve was where the VIP section of the audience was. He comments that the person there must be a VIP too. It didn't take long for Du to see that the black Pink Hunter was there. Anyone in South Korea would know that. She was a well-known spy. Kangster says that if she was that famous, she must really be an impressive hunter. And he agrees, because she was the ace of the Red Dragon Guild, one of the top 3 guilds. Kangso was surprised that June had such caliber and ability, until he noticed that she was actually hiding her face with a piece of paper. June was surprised because, out of all people, he was still there. Obviously, she would love to see his face even more than usual, but there had to be reasons why. She wanted to hide her identity. That's why Kenshin just decided to stop staring and stay quiet. Then, the host decides to start the magic and illusion show. Everyone watches, and the protagonist is impressed by how they move. Objects like that, even more so, without using any energy to make it all work. Suddenly Kangso felt pressure coming from a firearm. When they noticed, June's security saw a bullet breaking the glass. It was an aura bullet, and they were shocked because they were under attack. They prepared to defend the VIP area and raise their shields. Even so, the barriers begin to crack and break, even while trying to block. To break through a shield like that took surprising power. They'd wonder if it was a new and powerful version of aura bullets. Then one stood up and used her powers to protect them. She asked what the guard was doing, when it should be tracking the culprit, and wonders what suddenly started happening. Worried about the people from the restaurant. At the show, the staff guide the audience to evacuate safely. During this time, Lim shows up to help Haeon too, because she was crying in fear. Also, her teddy bear was ruined during the chaos. She runs into Yu's arms a bit later, and they talk to her. Meanwhile, Kangso gets irritated that they made the girl cry like that. He intended to find those responsible and make them pay. So he says you would need to use the bathroom, and asked them to stay there. The place there seems safe, at least for now. Kangso went to where the men in black were arguing with each other. They should have shot the fox right away, but even so it didn't work. They were arguing about the shots. That ended up having no effect. They could shoot a civilian to cause confusion and disappear, which angers Kangso even more. The protagonist intended to make them taste their own bullets. So he throws 2 bullets into the backs of the men with his own hands. They fall shocked and ask who exactly he was. That appeared suddenly. Besides making Haeon cry, they were targeting innocent civilians. One of them replies, yes, but didn't know who he was to begin with. They didn't intend to let him get away with it. Unpunished Kangso asks who they were talking about, who was behind all this. The rest of the people should take care of those men. Probably. The hunters from the association would show up soon to catch them. Then Kangso left, so he could return to Haeon and comfort her. On another day, Sora received a message and asked the children to stay on their own. She needed to step out for a moment to reply to a message. Sora and heard about the premeditated attack by the irregulars. They needed to pay more attention to the protection of the children. On the other end, they thanked Inspector Sora for her cooperation. The children called for her, and she asked for a moment before returning. Either way, she intended to go back to answering the calls. Afterward, the teacher returned, apologizing for being late, and asked if they knew what day it was. The day after tomorrow, it was Parents' Day, and on that day, they would make flowers from colored paper. They could also write some messages to express gratitude for all of them. All the children focused on making the flowers, including Haeon. Sora approached, praising the things she was preparing. The girl says she was making them for her dad and her. Mom, the others agreed, mentioning they were also making them for their grandparents. But then Sora saw that only one boy stayed quiet. After the questions, it was Jong-hoon, and she approached, mentioning that he was making a very pretty one. The other children got curious to know who he intended to give it to, and they told the teacher that Jong-hoon didn't have anyone like that. After all, he didn't have a mom or a dad, no family to share with. The boy was shaken to the point of curling up, and Sora came closer to comfort him. They shouldn't say such mean things like that. To a child, that's when Hung stood up, yelling that they were all really being mean. If someone didn't have parents, it wasn't right to pressure them about it. All the children started crying after being yelled at, and Haein kept scolding them, because obviously they wouldn't want that either. Still, they were being mean to Jong-hoon. Sora stammered to remind them that if they did something wrong, they should apologize. So they should apologize to Jong-hoon and never say anything like that again. They all apologized to Jong-hoon, who replied that it was okay. Haein came closer, asking him to stop crying. They could make the flowers together. And then he said he would give the flowers to his aunt. She agreed that it was really a good idea, and that his aunt would be happy with that. Meanwhile, Jim thought about the guild master Kim Hetchel, and a class awakened, who appeared during the era of chaos, as a magical swordsman who could wield a sword and fire magic. At the same time, he was a man who could make great contributions. In the subjugation of magical beasts, she went to Hethel's office, and having him as the leader of their guild always made her nervous, but she could do her best to make things work. Knocking on the door, Jin asked for permission from the guild master to enter. To start, she would summarize the day's schedule in chronological order. Immediately, Hetchel asked if there had been any progress in the investigation. It was about the Aurora bullet that tried to hit his daughter. On Children's Day, she agreed that they were investigating the suspects who had been found. They were found in the Silver Tower, but there hadn't been much development. Hetchel ruined rage, saying they were all completely useless. They should hurry up to find who was responsible for all of this. He was furious, wanting to know who dared target his daughter like that. Jean understood and showed him the file about the restaurant. He also requested. Then Hatchel took the papers about the shop owner and who the person was, realizing it was Yusum, and Jean agreed, because they had gathered information on him. Her friend said he used to explore dungeons and had a certain resume. He was quite skilled in cooking and had opened a restaurant. Then Jean asked how they should deal with you this time. Heckel was unsure of what she was trying to say. Like that, after his wife passed away, his daughter had lived her whole life, driven by revenge. And now, she was finally showing interest in something else. Besides, he was on good terms with the chef, and he would just leave him alone. With that, Jean agreed and was dismissed from his office. When he was alone, the guild master opened and took out the first paper rose. He had received it from Jian when she was still a child, and kept it as a lucky charm. Just seeing it made all his exhaustion melt away. Instantly, Haikil hoped that his daughter could regain her former joy as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Kangso was found by Du, who had visited the restaurant. Du was surprised, because he came to the restaurant so early at work, and Kangso himself replied that Du also arrived there quite early, and he agreed because, thanks to Kangso, he had managed to deliver his newspapers quickly. The protagonist didn't know if Du really needed to be, yet thankful. After all, it was the result of his own efforts. But in truth, he felt somewhat defeated. After living such an ordinary life for so long, this was what he got. But that was when he realized he could chase his dreams. Thanks to Kangso, he had been feeling discouraged ever since, thinking he was just a classy person. But he really didn't know that the dice-throwing technique would be so useful for delivering newspapers. Kangso had no idea how he had learned so much. Like that, they replied that the dark technique was one that became even more useful. But the protagonist still found all of this strange, because his logic that a ranked C would always be a ranked C didn't make any sense anymore. He'd also said the same thing last time about his improvements. Once again, Do thought it should be pretty obvious. The chances of receiving a reward were less than 0.001%. Even if Kong Su was lucky enough to have a reawakening, there was still no guarantee that the class would increase significantly. But Kong Su thought that was the problem. He had been mistaken. Awakening was only the starting point of power in that world. It seemed like no one was aware of a fact like that. In real life, the protagonist asked what kind of breathing technique he was using, but he didn't know what breathing technique was. Now, Kangso could understand that. The awakened in this world didn't learn the art of breathing techniques. That was why they were unable to sense their own energy, which caused it to flow out of their bodies continuously. Then Dooku said it was getting late, and he would head out to do his deliveries later. The protagonist was drinking with you, and he noticed something was bothering him. Kangso asked what he would do if he knew how to make awakened one stronger. You replied that he would share it with the other awakened. The protagonist was curious to know if he would do that, without expecting anything in return, and he laughed at that. If the awakened could protect their families with their strength, then yes, that was enough for you really. Just wanted to live safely. There was nothing he could personally use that power. For the truth was that you couldn't protect everything with his own hands, so he would just let everyone know the truth. That way their Heian could live in a safe world. Kangso could understand. So you offered him another glass of soda. The reason the protagonist hid his identity and lived peacefully. He was all to avoid causing even more chaos in the world around him. In that case, there was no reason not to help prevent chaos in the world. Now, Kangso was determined to create breathing techniques for the awakened. During the Meg, Kangso spent his time writing things down. He stayed up for 2 nights and finally managed to complete it. With this technique, awakened ones could accumulate aura inside their bodies. The technique was called the pure heart method. Now the problem was figuring out how to spread the word about it. He asked Yuan what kind of person the president of the Hunters Association was. She replied that he was someone with his own biography. Frankly, if it weren't for him, the current Republic of Korea might not even exist. He was someone who took on the nation's responsibilities and cared for the people, truly benefited and deserved the title of president. Kang Soo realized that a person with both power and justice could handle this personally. If the president was really trustworthy, he would certainly make good use of the breathing technique. For now, he decided to take a short break and get some rest. Meanwhile, President Hikio was arriving at work as usual. That was when he found a notebook on his desk titled Pure Heart Method. It looked like a martial arts book, and he wondered where it had come from. A man showed up to deliver his coffee, and he thanked him. He asked if he knew where the notebook had come from, but he denied it. It really did look like a martial arts book, which made Hatchell laugh upon realizing it. There was always a protagonist in those books who kept getting stronger and stronger. If just reading a book could make someone stronger, it would be a dream come true. Hatchell sighed because it really would be a good thing, but still he was curious to know where it came from. Even though the writing wasn't very artistic, he could see it was full of energy. That's when he found notes about the pure heart method. Kangso had written that the purpose of this method was to create path between the dungeon and the core, allowing the use of aura without any loss. That way it could enable the true manifestation of their abilities. You can understand that. The ranks of this world were not the final method, but a starting point. The heart method was a gift from the author, who hoped it would be used for the right reasons. After reading this, the director sighed and thought the research could increase the rank of awakened individuals all of the world. But as a result of many failures, there hadn't been any significant results to show. He only wondered who had written something like. Either way, the content itself was convincing enough. In fact, it was quite flawless when analyzed from that perspective, but not knowing who had brought it there and with what purpose made things complicated. Then he found this symbol and was surprised when he recognized it. The only trace that could be left, like that was by the 0 level awakened. It could be that this was sent by the famous 0 level awakened. Certainly, if that were the case, there was no doubt about the effectiveness of the invention. He also didn't seem to expect to cause any inconvenience. Reading this, Hatchell could tell his personality was quite clear. Now he should proceed as he wished, without exposing himself. Even Li Xin found everything he saw to be quite boring. He wondered what kind of face he would make if he saw the pure heart method. Hegel decided that he would call Li right away. It didn't take long for Li to appear, asking what the matter was. He should know that. He hated going out for nothing special. The director asked him to take a look there first, as it could be something important. Lee took the notebook to read, not knowing where it suddenly came from. Then he shouted in shock, asking where it came from. The director noticed that for him to be so shocked, it must have been something important. But the truth was that Lee was shocked, just to know where it came from. Hekil replied, that everything they needed to know was written right there. He could go ahead and meet the awakened person himself, and he could also try to control his energy. To verify the effectiveness of the research, Lee agreed, sighing because he always received impossible tasks. The truth was that he just wanted to know where it came from, and nothing more. Then, the director said, this was a gift from the new Zero Level Awakened. When he arrived that morning, the notebook was on his desk. From the beginning, there wasn't a single clue as to how, or when it got there. Not even the cameras caught anything. Lee asked, stammering, if he could really be the first to learn this. He replied that this was exactly why he called him. Even if there were any side effects, Lee was still in S class, so he could endure it, which made the Awakened quite satisfied. The first Zero Level Awakened in South Korea was someone he wanted to meet. Lee went out for a walk and paused to sit down, looking at the clear sky, wondering how long it had been since something like this had happened. When he was enjoying the sunlight outside, enjoying his life, it had been a long time. Back then a hero appeared who was described as someone with a miraculous appearance. It was the appearance of an S-rank Awakened, and people celebrated. And he finally found out. He was expected to stay in Korea for a long time and successfully close the S-rank portal that had appeared. Even so, in the process, several of his comrades ended up being sacrificed, and then he became afraid of his own power. The more he tried to gain control over his power, the more violent he became, until finally Lee was practically alone in his life, even with his efforts. For many people to return to their daily lives, he still wasn't able to control this unstable energy and how it affected others. Suddenly Lee coughed and curled up. He still couldn't control himself properly. He could never let his guard down, or something bad could happen. Until recently, he even resented his S-rank ability. Thanks to the power of the pure heart method, he managed to control his energy that way. Who knows, maybe he could learn to control himself and surpass the zero-level barrier. The zero-level who taught the pure heart method really was a good person. Then Lee noticed someone passing by. It was a food delivery person, but he was surprised because that person had a speed-related ability. That's because he was so fast, Lee barely noticed him. He could be B rank or higher. Kangso had arrived to politely deliver the restaurant food. He brought some sweets and pork 3 noodles and also a japchae. The fried dishes were on the house, and he decided to let them enjoy the meal. Lee saw all of this with his mouth watering, realizing he recognized the restaurant's name. At that, it didn't seem very far away. He decided he would check the place out himself. Kanko returned to the restaurant, and Jian handed him a glass of water to cool off. But that was when he noticed something wrong, and she asked if there was something in the taste of the water. He replied that it wasn't, that he actually sent someone outside. It was a man from before, but someone with exceptionally powerful energy. Lee entered the restaurant and was greeted, and Lim approached to attend to him. That was when Lee recognized Jaeyoon, asking why she was there. Yev asked if they knew each other, and he actually started recognizing Lee. And Jaeyoon shouted that he was actually her brother, laughing nervously. After all, it was a pretty common face, and many people usually said that. She asked Lee what he wanted to eat, because she could prepare something. Now, Lee didn't understand anything, but laughed and agreed to have noodles. June whispered to him what was really going on, and asked if it was okay to be walking around like that, when he could be seen. If he went into berserk again, she would be fine, but civilians could be in danger. Lee replied that he was fine now, which made June curious about that. He said she would end up finding out during the next training session, since there was nothing she could do. She gave an annoyed smile, because she was just a normal person. At least here she was. So she couldn't be making unnecessary comments. Lim appeared to deliver the noodles that were ready. She had heard that he was June's brother, and serve an extra portion of food. Lee gave a nervous laugh, but thanked her anyway. When he ate, he was surprised because the food was truly delicious. The noodles, even if not that special, still had a good flavor. Either way, he wondered how long it had been since he managed to eat noodles. He thought he might never feel that kind of happiness again. In his life then, he felt his energy and grew nervous at the idea of causing trouble for everyone there. Lee was nervous because if his emotions got too strong, then his energy might end up leaking and cause chaos inside. However, when he looked around, everything was fine. June came over asking if he had finished eating, but he himself didn't know how things had gone back to normal. Kangso had sensed that man's dangerous aura. Even if Lee had learned the pure heart method, he was still inexperienced. It was incredibly fortunate. Kangso had suppressed Lee's energy with his own. Either way, he wondered if that man had managed to use the technique, that quickly seeing how he knew June. He had to be an extraordinary individual. He was a bit clumsy, but properly learned the pure heart method. He seemed to be a person of great talent. He could be an S rank awakened. June hoped he had eaten well and wouldn't come back again. Actually, that was when Lee got a call and disguised it, so no one could hear. Apparently, he was being summoned. He said the director was calling, and there would be a meeting soon. He said goodbye to Jian, so they could see each other another time. She agreed as long as it wasn't inside the restaurant. When Lee left, Jian sighed in relief, hoping she hadn't been caught. When she saw Kangso behind her, she stammered that he really was her brother, but he didn't doubt it. He just agreed with her. Meanwhile, Lee returned to meet with Haekyeol to hear what was going on. He asked if he had by chance managed to perfect the pure heart method. Lee agreed, saying the effects were actually quite obvious. Seeing his response, the director felt something was bothering him. Then he said that at first he thought it was just a feeling, but now he was certain. If this method spreads to others, chaos will be brought to this world. When the director read about it, he felt the same thing. What he feared most from the side effects that this method could bring. Lee asked if he was worried, because they didn't know the intentions of its creator. Just like Haekyeol, he feared only one person. That person was someone who gave off an aura of respect mixed with fear. It was obviously the zero-level awakened, whose intentions were unknown. Meanwhile, in the office, Kim was busy drinking her coffee when she was approached by Meow. He reminded her that he could grab some coffee. During work, Meow noticed that his sister was working late again, just by looking at her face. She replied that lately, the irregulars had been more active than usual. He agreed, and speaking of which, he heard about the so-called human bomb who was active. Again, Kim said that because of him, the managers were all having problems. They were all nearly dying from stress due to so much work, and there was huge pressure because of security and the attempted attack on June. She asked if her brother wasn't busy too. Even so, he came all the way there just to bring some coffee. In truth, Meow wanted to know if she was free. The next afternoon, he got tickets for a ballet performance. That looked great. He thought they could go together if she was free. Kim agreed and joked by asking if he had missed the chance to go out. To Crush, he gave a nervous laugh, and Kim said she'd only find out he was dating someone. He just couldn't forget the date. Mignon would mark on the calendar just in case. They scheduled it for the 18th on the calendar, so they could go out. Then Mignon used his healing power on Kim, so she could recover her strength. Finally, she felt that she had recovered her senses, and thanked him for the help. The next Tuesday, Hugh's family gathered to watch the ballet performance. As well, they all appear all happy in her dance clothes. Yu and Kong so complimented her, because she really looked wonderful. Lim showed up, commenting that you looked all stiff that day. All of them were wearing formal clothes and looked great. Haeon complimented the protagonist, who thanked her for praise. Still, he was worried that something dangerous could happen. Again, Lim said it was because Kanko might draw too much attention for being attractive. Now he could understand what she meant, but he thanked her for the compliment. Finally, the group went to the venue where the ballet performance would take place. You noticed that Kangso always drew attention, no matter where he was. The protagonist, however, felt that this whole place was strange. That was because it was a huge place, but filled with strange aura. Somehow he could sense the aura of a dungeon inside, for some reason. Kangso froze when he felt someone's gaze fall on him. When he turned, he felt like he was being watched by someone. Realizing as he turned the wonder was June. She froze completely embarrassed because she saw Kangso wearing a suit. He recognized her right away, but wondered if he should talk to her. It was possible that the irregulars were targeting something nearby, which meant the magical energy in this place could be justified. To do something, he would have to reveal himself as a 0 level. Awakened, there was no need to get involved in something he wasn't even sure about. Either way, it would be better to check it out on his own, without disturbing anyone. Meanwhile, a man was laughing in his chair, calling everyone fools. The performance they were about to watch would be the last of their lives. The assistant next to him told Lord Asmodean that. He brought him a drink. Asmodean agreed that he would love to drink something red and high quality. He asked if everything was ready, and his men confirmed it was. Then he declared that the second act with Clara and the prince's dance would begin. That's how the start of the party would work. At that, Asmodee brandished his sword and teleported to the top of the venue, where he'd have a great view, a perfect spot to watch the explosion of the concert hall. As they turned, Kangso appeared, asking what they meant by explosion. Asmodee was startled when he turned, asking who he was. He didn't want to ruin his good move, so he appreciated cooperation. Even so, ASMO didn't understand what this guy was talking about. It seemed like he shouldn't even know who he was dealing with. But soon, Kangso approached and landed a direct punch on him. The man flew away like a feather, to the shock of his assistant. Kangso said that in this world, trying to act like a gentleman, one mistake, and the situation would turn into complete chaos. And he told him to get up already and stop being so dramatic. Asmodee got up in shock, because Kangso hadn't even hit with full force. Even so, he was making that mess in front of everyone like it was a big deal, which irritated Asmodee, because he didn't even know who that guy was. And yet he hit him. Kangso asked who he was, and he introduced himself. But at the same moment, Asmodee was startled, because he couldn't even see Kangso's face clearly. He said he didn't care if he was Asmodee or whatever else, but he still wanted to know what they planned to do. In the concert hall, Asmu called him a reckless fool. Under his orders, they had planted a bomb at the location. He placed it in the structure near the pillar, and it would destroy all the insects inside. Kangso asked if what the subordinate was saying was true. Asmu got irritated because he was called a subordinate. Kangso laughed, but then told the person next to him to stop pretending. And the person laughed, because Kangso really had good intuition. That surprised Asmode, who stood up, saying he was tired of playing secretary. It was a good time to withdraw, which left Asmode confused. And suddenly, the secretary pierced through his body with his hand. The artifact of Asmodee, or rather, even the name Asmodee, was too much for him. With that, he simply let the man fall in front of him. After stealing the sword, Kangso asks who he really was to begin with, and he reveals himself as the real Asmodee, not the fake one like the idiot he killed. In that case, the protagonist approaches to see if he was the true master behind everything. Kangso punched him but didn't hit anything. He's surprised, because it seemed like some kind of illusion. Asmodee appeared behind Kangso, laughing because he really was fast. The protagonist asks if he was even human to begin with, and he grumbles, because they were talking like that about a girl. Kangso realizes that it was actually a girl, disguised as a secretary. Either way, the identity of Asmodeus was still a secret. Maybe it could meet again in the future, and you would find out. At this point, Asmodeus uses the sword to open a portal and move through it. It was a shame she missed the show because of Kangso. She would forgive him, because he was totally retight to begin with. Asmodeus says goodbye and begins to enter the portal, and stops. That's because the portal was opened by the artifact, but it was still distorting. Kangso asks how exactly she planned to escape just like that, and Asmodeus realizes the protagonist had closed the portal with his aura. He approaches, saying that Asmodeus had an interesting ability. After all, she could cut space with a sword, and then maybe reconnect it. Asmodeus was shocked, because something like that happened. It was clear he was dangerous if Kangso stopped moving. That's because Asmodeus was preparing to escape using her formless state. The protagonist questions, how long? She planned to keep using those idiotic tricks. Kangso's attacks continue, and Asmodeus tries to defend herself, even in her formless state. She could still feel the impacts, and the duration of the ability would run out. Very soon, in fact, it ended quickly, surprising Asmodeus. After all, things would have been different if her rank was just a bit higher. Kangso finished by landing a punch that sent his opponent flying. The black blood, as expected, made him conclude she wasn't human. Kangso asks if by chance it was some kind of human form. Asmodeus realizes it was a huge mess, and she couldn't escape from it, and she wonders if there was another choice. Without using that other method, Kangso asked what exactly she was. The aura he felt from her was quite extraordinary and different from what he thought. This makes her laugh, asking if he could spare her life if she answered. Kangso asks if she really planned to beg like that, and she laughs because, obviously, none of that would happen to begin with. In an unexpected scene, the protagonist saw her pull out her sword and stab herself. He didn't think she would choose to take her own life to maintain her secret identity. Asmodeus laughs. Maybe she hadn't seen things clearly. Then she smiles, saying goodbye, because she hoped they'd never meet again. Kangster saw her vanish and realized he had never seen an ability like that. He should have done something different before asking those questions. Beside him, the man was laughing after she betrayed him, but he wanted his revenge. Kangso asks what it was they were planning from the beginning. He replies that the bomb was prepared to explode during Clara and the prince's dance. There was a pyrotechnic ready to ignite the fire from outside the audience. Kangso realizes he must find this disguised person. Meanwhile, Hae-young was watching the ballet performance, completely enchanted. Lim smiles, because the next one would be the Waltz of the Flowers. They'd be watching, and then the climax of Clara and the prince's dance would occur. At the same time, Lee was with a team of people at the site. He checked which part of the dance would happen next. In the performance, the man who visited his house suddenly had energy. A level 0, he disappeared after leaving a message about how an irregular would appear. In the art hall, Heckle said he couldn't even find an explanation for how. He knew so much, but if he said it, then there must be truth in his words. Then the director called Lee and told him to get the enforcers to go to the site and handle it. They couldn't cause a public commotion because of this. With that, Lee went to the location and confirmed he could feel a certain magical energy based on the building layout. It should be near the utility room. First, they needed to evacuate the audience, and Lee orders everyone to prepare. They rush into the place. Thanks to the map provided by the president, they were able to reduce the search time and go directly where they needed to be. It didn't take long for Lee to find a man with suspicious, magical energy. The man approached, reminding him that this place was a restricted area. They didn't know who those people were, but they had to leave. So Lee sent him flying away with a punch. Immediately inside the room, several people were confused about what was happening. Lee entered saying they were public authorities and were going to arrest them. With that, they managed to tie up all of them, even though they weren't anything special. When they looked, one man was laughing even in that situation, and he asked if he knew anything more about what was going on. The man asks if he couldn't even laugh when he wanted to. Right away, Lee pressures him further, not wanting to ask the same thing twice. Then he says the bomb with explosives was hidden on the stage. It caught Lee off guard, because apparently it was in the middle of all those people. With that, they make an announcement to the audience that it was an emergency, because a group of irregulars had appeared, and they should leave quickly. And safely, Yu holds his daughter to guide her out, safely in his arms. He wonders where Kangso went and if he was safe. Suddenly, a man shouts from the middle of the venue, catching everyone's attention. And an explosion happens, followed by several more. To everyone's surprise, it was an irregular who used his ability to detonate multiple bombs at once while Yu mentally cried for help. Kangso came running in. He checked to see if everyone was safe, but other men appeared. They give men 10 to let anyone escape from there anyway. They were preventing people from leaving and getting caught in the explosions outside. They couldn't even get in to help the people. They forced their way in, and Lee appeared, telling the men to surrender. After all, the others in the other room had all been arrested, and they recognized him immediately, the S-Class hunter, who appeared to stop the destruction of the venue. But the bomb man didn't want to die for them, but rather take Lee with him. He was the second-generation bomb man, and wanted to take everyone down with him. Lee realized it was a problem. It was a serious situation. Blocking such a massive explosion would be impossible if he took off with it, even if he killed him. Once he used his power, he couldn't save the people. That's when he noticed a familiar energy around him. The energy had wrapped around the explosion points. It seemed to be surrounding the explosion and was going to stabilize it. That way the power extinguished everything, as if nothing had happened in the first place. And the bomb man was left completely frozen, in shock at what he saw. Then, he himself decided to end it all with his own hands. Lee saw that he had blown himself up as a result of using all his power. He approached to check if he could still be saved, and his men confirmed he was breathing, but needed immediate treatment. Then a healer from the Silver Tower appeared to handle the situation, while Mayan took care of things. Lee soon spotted Kangso on the other side of the venue. The protagonist gave him a thumbs up, and Lee wondered if he had just been praised. But now he could understand. The energy he had felt before. It was the same energy that had stopped his power at the restaurant earlier. With that now, Lee could say for sure what happened. Outside, Hyam was crying because she wanted to have seen Claire's dance. And the ballerina herself appears to smile at Hyam and talk to her then. They decide to do the end of the performance outside the venue. Even though they only had moonlight and no stage, the Shining Stars gave a performance, even more spectacular than before. And that night, Lee went to meet Kangso and asked to become his disciple. The protagonist found himself in a really troublesome situation because after everything that happened, Lee visited the restaurant again. When Kenshin saw this smile, he felt that things had just gotten troublesome. He knew this would happen someday, but it was just too early. Now, he started saying Kenshin was the level 0 awakened one, but Kangso asked him not to talk about that there. It was better to talk in a quiet, more distant place the next day. So they arranged to meet one night at another location. The protagonist apologizes because he must be very busy, but Lee laughs because he always had time to meet him. In fact, he wanted to thank him because it was thanks to him that a major disaster was avoided. Kangso noticed he was being called teacher and asked why. He replies simply because he was his great savior. The pure heart method turned his life upside down and changed everything. Kangso was kind of shocked because he was being seen with such admiration, and yet apologizes because he was rude when he visited his house the other day. That's because Lien approached him the other time, asking who he really was and how he found out about that place. Kangsu had just gone to his house to tell him about the irregulars that would appear. He knew. It must be hard to believe, but it was the truth. Lee sighed, unsure of what proof there was that something like that could happen. Assuming it was true, he didn't understand why Kangso had come to him. Kangso replies that he was someone who had become a level 0 awakened. The fact that Leon reached level 0 was still unknown to the public, so he knew Kangso must have sensed the pure energy within him, especially after using the pure heart method. That's why now Lee wanted to ask Kangso to take him as his disciple. Kangso asks why he wanted to do that, and he replies that he would like to become even stronger than he is now. However, he was already powerful enough in Kangso's view. With the pure heart method, he would become even more powerful than before. Therefore, there was no need to rush Ben. Lee replies that after seeing his abilities the other day, he ended up realizing he was far from being able to protect everyone. His family lived in South Korea. His friends lived in that city, and his colleagues had always fought by his side when necessary. If South Korea ended up in danger, they would be in danger too. Kangso's had to think more calmly about it. After hearing that, His motivation to use his powers was similar to Lee's, the desire to protect his family and his friends, who showed such kindness. It wasn't different from the wishes Lee now had. In truth, that's when Lee approached and held his hand, begging for his permission. After a moment of thought, the protagonist sighed. If Lee grew quickly, it would reduce his need to interfere in problems. He could help only when it was truly necessary. And more importantly, if Lee became more powerful, he could put the world in safety, and thus fulfill his wishes. Kong Su asked how old he was, and he replies they were almost the same age. Kong Su laughed a little upon hearing that. He was actually 3 years younger, and he was still asking to become his disciple. It seemed he was having a bit of trouble thinking about it. Finally, the protagonist ends up agreeing to give him guidance. They could treat each other like brothers, instead of master and disciple. Very happy, Lee bows deeply in thanks for his consideration. Then Kang So says they should meet there on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Each week Lee agrees, and so they could be in his training from then on. First, he would personally teach him techniques from the pure heart method. Lee was truly very happy. It seemed much more efficient when guided. He asked what he should do next for his upcoming lessons. Kangaroo says he heard that Lee used a sword. However, even if he wanted to give the lessons, he didn't have a sword for it. A fat Lee says if he needed a sword, he had one right there and offer. Lee drew his sword and showed that this was his beloved Wind Lord. The protagonist was impressed that he just pulled the sword out of the air. And Lee explains that this was actually called an inventory. It was something common sense among awakenings. Kang So didn't know that yet. He had completely forgotten about it, even though it was such an expensive thing. Even so, having something like that seemed pretty useful. Then Lee suggests he could give one to Kang So, if that's what he wanted. As you could see, the inventory was used in a tattoo, and was a portable item. Its size was determined by the ability of the person who received it. Kang So asks how big his inventory was, and Lee replies that it was considerably large. Actually, when he reached level 0, it expanded to the size of a building. The protagonist took the item from the inventory and asked if it was possible to enter the inventory. And even so, this question was actually confirmed. After all, the inventory was like a kind of subspace. However, the amount of time one could stay inside depended on their ability. At that, Kang So thanks him for the explanations and promises he'll use it well. At the very least, they could take a look at his swordsmanship and abilities. Lee shows his skill. Using the sword with a few movements in the air, there was a certain rhythm to it, but it failed as a practical combat technique. Kang So asked him to stop, because he thought he had seen enough. Then he asked where he learned to use a sword. He replies that it was a technique he learned at the Hunter Training Center. They called it Manjum style, and it was quite widespread. Kangaroo says that, to be honest, the swordsmanship he used wasn't bad at all, but it was kind of inefficient. If he wanted, he could teach a better version. Lee immediately and humbly asked for his teachings to learn more. The technique the protagonist would teach was called Furious Wind Sword. It was capable of splitting the ocean with its sheer power. Lee was confused by the giant name of the technique, and Kinzo agrees it was kind of childish. But first he would demonstrate it, and asked to borrow his sword. Kong Su took the sword and unsheathed it. Immediately, Lee felt that just by watching him draw the sword, he could feel an immense pressure coming from him. Thus Kong Su moved his sword and used the technique against a nearby rock. That impressed Lee, because the rock was cut as if it were bread. It impressed him, because it truly was an incredible technique. Kong So explains that if he imbued it with his inner energy, the sword technique would do that. It could cut through anything, and do so quickly and efficiently. Then Lee asked if by chance he used inner energy just now. Kong So replies that actually he didn't use it. He simply swung it. Normally, if he had used his inner energy and swung the sword, the entire area would have collapsed. That only left Lee more impressed with the level of that awakened. Even though both were level 0, they were still far from similar in strength. He was still very far from his ideal of power. He would need to be diligent to learn a lot. Later, the protagonist went back to working at the restaurant. As usual, he made the right choice in switching his broom. from wood to iron. After all last time, he managed to break it completely just by gripping it. However, when he looked to the other side of the street, he saw a new bookstore. The person who came out of it was none other than Lee. With a big smile, Kangso asked if by any chance the bookstore was his, if he owned it. He laughed and agreed that it was indeed the case. He had wanted to say it earlier, but never found the right moment. Liu appears to tell the protagonist to finish the task, so they could go back to eat. Then he noticed Lee there, which surprised him to see him again. Lee greets him. It was the first time he did so properly. He had just moved into the building next to the restaurant. Recently, you agree is. After all, he was very grateful for the last time they saw each other. But even so, Eve was surprised to hear that Lee owned the bookstore. He was shocked. Having a powerful hunter as a neighbor was unexpected. Either way, Haim appeared, calling everyone to come inside and eat. She also noticed that Lee was there already. Knowing he was the bookstore owner, Lee greets the girl, and you suggest that he come in to eat with them. But Lee refuses, saying he didn't want to intrude on his life. So soon Lim appears, saying it was all right. It would just be one more plate at the table. In that case, Lee ended up accepting, and came in to eat with everyone else. He says he ate very well and was full after Lim checked. You laughed, happy that they could show their gratitude to him. This way once again, and they want to thank Lee, because he saved his family during the chaos. The other time, he gets nervous, replying that he just did what you should have done from the beginning anyway. He asks about the way of addressing Kangso. After all, he seemed to be calling him brother. Unlike before, the protagonist replies that it just ended up happening the other day. Even so, you kept wondering when they got so close. Even though he was his friend, it was always hard to understand Kangso and what he did. Then Lee asks if the protagonist marked his inventory stone if he hadn't done it. You could help him with it whenever he wanted. Kangso agrees, because he really ended up forgetting, and asks if there was a way to do it. He replies that it was actually quite simple. Just how to place the tattoo on his arm. The location could be of his choosing, and you should say it out loud to register it. Then the procedure would begin right away. To mark his inventory, Kangso does what Lee says, and sees the inventory marked on his arm. To open the inventory, he just needed to ask for it internally. To retrieve an object, he only needed to think of what he had stored inside. When you reached the small space that opened inside, you could just grab the item. The owner of the inventory could also enter inside it, if they wanted. Kangster decides to enter the inventory, surprised that Karanji ended up going in with him. Then when Karanji asks where they were, he replies they were inside his inventory. His brother's inventory was large enough to hold an entire building. Even so, when he looked, Kangso's inventory seemed a bit too vast. The manual said that no matter what happened inside, it wouldn't be too much. At least not for the inventory holder, or for what was placed inside it. He wonders if he should try practicing Kung Fu in there and take advantage of the isolated space. The protagonist ran inside and saw that truly was a huge place. He couldn't even see any of things around him. To be honest, he could take a break that day and look around more calmly. Hangster decides to leave the inventory and return to the restaurant. Hugh asks if it was really as big as they expected it to be. The protagonist replies, that was so vast he could barely be sure actually, but it seemed the size in question was like a city. That shocked the others at the table around him, including Lee. The inventory was supposed to be as big as the user's power actually, and they wonder how powerful Kenzo really was. That was the sheer difference between them. The protagonist says it was a lot of space, but it felt kind of pointless to leave empty. So Lee says that if he could get control magic stones, he could decorate the place however he wanted to. If he'd wished, he could even build buildings and houses inside it, if that was his will. Kangso asks if those control magic stones were the ones for magical beasts. Lee agrees normally. Only officially registered hunters could enter the portals. But in places like Kangwon province, it was different. There were kind of some unprocessed magical beasts. That made him curious, because in that case, they were the kind that didn't belong to anyone. Lee asked if he planned to obtain those magic stones. The monsters outside the portals didn't really belong to anyone. Even so, Kangso intended to do that, so he could add things to his inventory. It was a good idea in Lee's opinion. Ever since he reached level 0, he had been thinking of handling those creatures with his own hands, so it would be a relief to have him by his side, so they could do it together. He thinks that they said the monsters of Gung Wandu were all incredibly powerful, but even so he didn't feel worried at all about something like that. Instead, he almost felt sorry for the monsters. Time passes and Young tells her father she wants to learn ballet. She wanted to learn to dance beautifully and spin like the ballerinas she saw before. It seemed the performance the other day left a big impression on her. Lim says she finished her research. There was a dance academy nearby. It seemed more suitable than expected actually. Thinking like that, Yu considers that they should go and schedule a consultation. Hyung gets really happy, promising that she would learn and try her best. At the dance studio, the girls learned every movement and strengthened their bodies. They arrive at the studio to talk with the teacher Sari, telling her that there was a student there who wanted to observe the classes. Sari smiled at Hyam, asking if she was interested in ballet, or maybe she would like to practice in uniform and join the class. Immediately, Sari kept guiding her students to correct their posture and continue the movements. In fact, Siri noticed that Haeon was quite talented, despite everything. A little later, the classes end and they leave, thanking her for the practical lessons. Next to Siri, a man asks if the girl had come there for the first time. She replies yes. Apparently, she intended to join right away. She had only seen her briefly, but it seemed she had a lot of potential. The man says that actually, he didn't come just to observe the classes. He was looking for model children who could be of interest to him, but his ability only responded strongly to that particular child. Sarah was impressed. She wanted to say that the ability had identified her talent. The man agrees. He had never felt such a powerful impression before, and he was wondering if he could get the parents' contact details later. She couldn't say anything directly. She would ask them first. That's when you heard about Haim becoming a child model. Lim agrees when she told her husband about the studio. People's intentions. The brother of teacher Siri worked in a marketing team at Eleanor's. He considered if they could let Haim becoming a new model. That way new children could wear their clothes, and she would catch their attention. This wasn't just a one-time offer. They wanted to employ her properly. Furthermore, they wanted to place her in Element's Model Academy too. He was shocked, because that academy was where the highest class models went. That impressed him. He never expected his daughter to become a model. It seemed Hanyang was really attracting a lot of attention. It wasn't even an ordinary offer like any other. Even more so when she had her mother's genes. And Lim got embarrassed hearing the compliments. Time passed, and during one night, two men were having a drinking meeting. One of them said there was no need to be so tense. He had even bought a good wine for the occasion. They could drink it and enjoy themselves. The other man agrees with Lord Muling, and he asked a man named Nemas. Wanted to know if he had heard anything about Asmode. Nibus chokes on his own drink, replying that he hadn't heard anything. It had been 50 days since Asmode left the shop, and he apologizes for that. Mullen comments that the news seemed to travel slowly, just like Asmode, because he interrupted his plan. He was sent to the Winter of Ice. They couldn't even say goodbye to him at this point. In fact, Nimbus was shocked to hear about the frozen hell. There was a terrible place filled with ice everywhere, with temperatures below -100 degrees. Muling asks if he at least knew where Kobold might be. They were talking about Lord Kobold. After losing the art hall to Asmodee, he went out of reach, apparently complaining about what happened. But Nimbus should know something, and he trembles as he tries to respond. There was no way someone of low rank like him could know anything. That only made Nimbus more tense, wondering why he had even been called there, while Muling insisted on knowing. Nimbus simply reflects in silence. That old man knew. Nibs had arranged a hiding place for Kobold. If he spoke, Kobold wouldn't let him off and would punish him. He didn't know how, but he had to find a way to survive somehow. Then Nibs asks if he could keep a secret about what he was about to say. Mullinger agrees. and Nimbus tells him about the place where Kobold was hiding. It was the office of the director of the Elements Modeling Academy. At the academy, you ask his daughter not to be nervous at all. In fact, she was perfectly calm, unlike her father. The group decided to go further into the building. But then Kangso stopped walking. He crossed paths with a man who walked past them, catching his attention. He wonders what that was. He could feel remnants of magical energy. The aura that just came didn't seem to belong to that man. Then the man inside the room greeted Hu's family. He introduces himself as Troy Hong-soo, the director of the Eleanor's Modeling Academy. Hedden bows to greet Troy, which makes him smile, just as manager Yoon described. She was perfect to fulfill the image of elegance. It was the minimum they asked from the children, and the clothes they would wear from then on. Yoon gave a nervous laugh as his daughter received the compliments. Troy agrees. Maybe that's why he brought her parents there. But she wasn't just cute. She also carried a lot of grace. He asked them to follow him because he would like to give them a tour of the academy. They continue walking as Troy explains things about the academy. For a long time, he says that is expected of South Korea and a first-class academy. Everything inside was impressive, from the people to the objects and rooms. Kangso ended up getting tense when he noticed an energy approaching them. The man who was about to walk past them had an impressive aura, so the protagonist sends a message to Lee, apologizing for taking up his time. After all, he must be quite busy, but there was an urgent matter to address. He asked if he could check if the Elements Modeling Academy had irregulars. Kangso only felt the man passed by him. Normally, they were all hiding themselves there very well, but their energy was powerful and dark. He wonders if this place could actually be a hideout for regulars. Lee replies that the place seemed relatively suspicious. In fact, the Silver Tower would send its agents, who had already infiltrated the place. The vice director was especially suspicious. We're always keeping an eye on him. Kangso approaches Hyun, asking if she wanted to be a clothing model. She replies yes. She had been really excited about it since the previous night. Then the protagonist realizes he needed to keep an eye on that vice director. If he acted now, who knows? It might ruin Hyun's dreams, and he would prevent that. The protagonist uses his inventory and enters inside it. Last time, he went to Gangwon-do with Lee and managed to get some classic beasts, thus obtaining magical crystals, as had been recommended earlier. Their energy was kind of dark, so they needed to be purified first. Kangso wonders if he could pour his energy into the mana crystals. That way he could build structures, according to what he imagined, by purifying them. Protagonist starts by building a structure, ending up impressed. Maybe it was because it was a high-quality magic crystal, but he could build complex structures more easily than expected. He checked the space and noticed it was really good. And speaking of that, he still had that magic stone he got from the Dalhan. The dark energy he felt before purifying it was still inside it, and the energy from that is mode. Guy last time was very similar. Both dark, the energy he felt from the vice director was quite similar to theirs. Now that he thought about it, Asmodee also had his human form, but his blood was black, so it was clear he wasn't truly human. In that case, it could be that he was actually a humanoid demon. However, Kangso felt that this couldn't be right. Asmodee lacked the destructive instincts, typical of demons. He knew maybe he was suppressing all of that at will, but calling him just a powerful human felt inaccurate. His power was almost at the level of an S rank awakened. When compared, if things started going off track at this point, he'd need to intervene. This country could end up being tamed and fall into chaos quickly. Kangaroo thinks about this, but still wasn't sure about any of it to begin with. Anyway, he decided to leave the inventory and heard his name being called. He was all happy. After finishing his daughter's modeling contract, thanks to Juan's help, they were finally able to make it work. The protagonist is happy that everything worked out and asks if the contract was finalized, and he agrees. They wanted Haim to attend the new product launch the following week. Kangso noticed that things really were kind of urgent. Yu agrees they asked for her to join the rehearsal, starting the next day. So Kangso asks how long the contract would last. He replies that the academy asked for a 1-year exclusive contract in total, but thinking about it, a contract like that would actually be better. If Hei Hong didn't like being a model, she'd have space to leave. Hu agrees because he had been thinking the same thing. She was still quite young and would be able to leave as soon as she wanted. But he'd do as Kinser suggested. This way they could ensure everything was safe. Yu's family went to talk with the director, who was happy to negotiate. Hien would certainly do her best. And Kangso simply watched it all. Suddenly the protagonist hears a voice. That must belong to the vice director. He could hear his voice but not see him. It was the two men arguing. One of them yells at the vice director that he clearly recommended him as a model. The model was furious, because even though he was the new face, that happened. The vice director sighs, not knowing what he could do, against the director's orders, and asked the model to stop yelling. Keeping his voice low, someone could hear them. They could at least go to the rooftop to talk. Kangso was worried about what Lee had told him earlier about that group. After all, Lee had sensed an energy similar to Asmo's. If a source was similar magical energy, they were certainly working together. They also did deeper research on the academy itself, but there was no concrete evidence. Everything just seemed a bit suspicious. After all, some events had been drawing attention for some time. It was reported that several people had taken their own lives, and some fatal accidents happened to models and staff members. Hanko wonders why those things were suddenly happening. He agrees the police investigated, but found no connections or anomalies. Even the Silver Tower had secretly joined the investigation. Now the protagonist was sure. He had to follow the vice director to the rooftop. At the location, the model asks what he should do now. The vice director emitted a terrifying aura with a smile on his face, especially when he suddenly grabbed the model's head. Roughly, he laughed just like the other small creatures. He should offer his life energy to him. Suddenly, a voice yells for him to stop immediately, and the vice director turns. A woman from the Silver Tower shouted for him to stop and introduce herself, commanding him to take his hands off the model. Immediately, he was under arrest for violating special laws for awakened beings. After all, he was clearly endangering someone's life. Using his powers, the vice director throws the model aside when he saw the Silver Tower appear. But it wasn't bad at all. Could have a little fun before finishing what he wanted. The woman took the hit and covered herself to defend being thrown back. That impressed him. After all, she blocked the attack without much difficulty. He still wanted to spend some time playing, in hopes she wouldn't disappoint him. She tries to strike him, but the man dodges and quickly disappears from her view. He says she was too slow and appears behind her to attack. After striking her from behind, the vice director grins widely. It seemed that was all she had, even though he was expecting much more. But this time, he could finish the battle and send her to the heavens. However, his attack was stopped by an external interference. He turned around asking who did that and who he was. Hangso hoped he hadn't arrived too late. He ordered the man to step away from the woman, who was still injured on the ground. But the vice director charged him asking who he was. Even so, the protagonist didn't receive any damage, surprising him when he realized that not only he, but also the woman had disappeared, which enraged the man when he realized he had been blatantly tricked. Kangso quickly tended to the woman's bleeding, but she should move now. She thanked him, but still couldn't stop. She needed to resolve the situation, but she didn't need to worry, because Kangso intended to handle everything. The vice director could sense a presence hiding and realize where they went. He couldn't believe someone dared to pull such tricks right in front of him. Kangso appeared, saying he knew well that he wasn't human. At the very least, he could now reveal his true form. The vice director was surprised that someone knew his identity. The intelligence of the Silver Towers seemed to have been that impressive. More important than that, he didn't understand the oppressive feeling he had. But it seemed he no longer had any need to hide anyway. He intended to show him something very special this time. The man then revealed horns on his head, laughing as he revealed himself. Now that he had seen this form, he could no longer die peacefully. So he charged Akanzo again, ready to finish him off. Sighing, the protagonist let it go anyway, and immediately sent in flying far away, without even moving properly. On the ground, after taking such a strong hit, he didn't know what happened. He was feeling pain, but at the same time didn't understand why it hurt, and he wondered how he ended up on the ground. He had been knocked out by that worm. He was in shock. There had to be some mistake. He could only have messed up. But as expected, Kangaroo saw that he had black blood too. He soon noticed the blood was black. If he had human blood, it wouldn't be like that. It seemed he had used all human blood up until now. Kangaroo realized he had been using human blood all this time to disguise himself. It looked like a demon had been parasitizing a human body, but the man didn't intend to let himself be defeated or brought down like that, especially not by inferior beings of any kind, including Kangso. Before he knew it, the man had transformed into a kind of wolf. In front of him, he had let his guard down before, so he ended up getting hit. Suddenly, his body began to burn with purple fire, but now he would transform. He would find his complete form to finish off Kangso. He attacked him from behind. The protagonist stopped him just by grabbing his claw. It was such a ridiculous scene that Kangso simply twisted his claw and tore his arm. High-speed movements like that were nothing to him. But if he truly wanted to show his speed, Kangso would show him how it's done. Thus, when attacking, he went flying and hit the wall in just one move. The man was shocked. Nothing like that was supposed to happen, even in his complete form. He couldn't even lay a finger on him. He wondered if this was really the guy who defeated as Mode. But having someone like him there was truly absurd. Kangaroo approached to ask again. Wanted to know what he was. If he wasn't a human and not even a demon, he'd have a name to be called. The wolf laughed, not intending to say, and just told him to kill him, because he was a proud warrior. Kangaroo stepped on his tail right away, ready to force him to talk, even though he said to kill him. The protagonist didn't intend to follow that order so easily. Even the woman from the Silver Tower was frightened, seeing Kanko beat him up. After taking so many hits, he finally decided he would talk. He would tell everything, as long as the endless attack stopped. The wolf said they were demons, a tribe of demons. They had come there, to the second intermediate realm by their orders, all to obtain the orbs of despair. Kangso asked what the orbs of despair were, and he said, it was the energy of despair created when humans die. They experienced an overload of fear and frustration. In those moments, the orbs, they were collected and compressed into despair, and so they would be called the orbs of despair, which were what they sought. And those like him, who developed the ability to create and collect orbs of despair, they were all called collectors. And now Kangso understood better. It seemed that being a collector was a matter of pride for him. The protagonist asked how many lives he had taken, and he replied, not many. Other officers had taken even more lives than he could have ever dreamed. At that, Kanko pressured him, and he begged to have his life spared. Just this once. After all, he was only doing things he was ordered to do. At least he didn't hurt him. And for now on, he wouldn't hunt there anymore. Kangaroo says that none of that was the right thing to say. Asking for mercy just because he wouldn't hurt him. He should reflect on who he was going to hurt. He intended to seal his power, so he could never hurt anyone again. Thus Kangso finally finished him off, without much difficulty. Leaving his fate to the association will be the right thing to do. Now it didn't take long for the wolf to return to his human form. Both before and after the transformation, he still looked like an abominable creature. Soon, the woman from the Silver Tower appeared and stood up. The protagonist reminded her that moving would only worsen her pain. And bleeding, she replied that it was okay, but she still wanted to speak, and asked if by chance he was the level 0 awakened. After a moment of hesitation, Kangso agreed. That was what they called him. The woman was impressed, but Kangso asked her to calm down. Actually, he wanted her to pretend she had never seen anything there. Even so, she was tense, because she didn't think it was very appropriate. Kangso was satisfied with his life as it was now. The idea of offering himself for a greater good was the kind of thing he was tired of doing. Above all, he didn't want people around him to die because of him. The protagonist's words made the woman remember Lee. That person had said the same things he was saying now. He had to give up his ordinary life as an individual to protect others, just to be able to protect those people. He didn't even know. Having a level 0 awakened, as in, ally could be good for the association. But after seeing Lee's life, she didn't feel right, recommending such a life of sacrifice. Finally, she agreed. After all, Kanko saved her life, and it was the least she could do. He apologized for the strange request, but she was okay with it. That place was full of secrets anyway, and it wouldn't change. It was a bit late, but she also thanked the protagonist for what he had done, for that, and for so many other incidents he got involved in and helped people. She wanted to thank him for all the things he had secretly done. Until now, after all, Kong Saab had saved many lives on his own. He replied that there was no need to mention that. He would now be on his way. The protagonist disappeared, surprising her as it was like vanishing with the wind. Now, it was time to clean the rooftop. And the horrible image of the unconscious man, she alerted her superiors that the situation was over, asking the field and medical team to provide support. They should head up to the roof of the 11th Modeling Academy. Later, the vice director was furious after being arrested. Even though it should have been just a table and regular handcuffs, he still couldn't use his strength, and much less transform. He wondered what that guy had done, not knowing how it ended up like this. If it weren't for that guy's monstrous strength, things would have been different. Suddenly he noticed. Everything went dark and wondered if it was a blackout. When the light came back, a figure appeared at his side and scared him. The one who appeared was Milling, commenting on the view he had there. The man realized he had been careless, but hadn't said anything to the humans. He swore he couldn't betray them, begging to have his life spared, and for him to believe him. Even so, Milling grabbed his head and told him to shut up, that he could see his memories and the things that had happened. Even so, for some reason the man's memories were all very vague. As he said, he really was a big, useless fool. Even in these moments, you should know what he had always emphasized about his actions. Those who were useless were a disgrace to the demon race. The man kept begging to at least be heard, but one who did this wasn't an ordinary guy, much less a known awakened. Nolan told him to shut up, not listening to his words at all. He was a disgrace and a dark stain on their demon race. Therefore, Milling didn't even hesitate to finish him off. With his own hands, he muttered that this demon was truly pathetic, from beginning to end. After finishing him off, he simply disappeared from where he was. A little later, someone came running into the room to see what happened. That's when they shouted that something was wrong, because everyone in the hallway had collapsed. Yino was going crazy. With all the chaos that had happened, he didn't even know what to do, and some asked him to calm down a little. Even so, Yunho asked his boss if something like this could really happen. It was kind of suspicious, but in a place where they had only started, with a simple investigation. Suddenly, an irregular with a demon transformation appeared. Team leader Kim Myonji was seriously injured after capturing the irregular, and before they could properly investigate, the irregular was killed. On top of that, it happened inside the investigation room, at the association's headquarters. A death inside the association wasn't something that could normally happen. Song replied that at least it could be grateful that Kim returned alive. She specialized in detection, but also had some skill in combat. Even so, it seemed that things had been extremely dangerous. Investigation of the battle traces on the rooftop showed that the vice director was powerful. He could be recognized as someone of S rank. In a way, Juno was shocked by what he heard, not knowing how Kim handled that guy alone. Stark replied that not only that, but she also blocked his energy flow, which meant that something from outside must have happened. Only Kim, the irregular, and a civilian were found on the rooftop. The regular, even after transforming into a demon with S rank, combat level. Even so, he ended up being knocked down and passed out. During the fight, it could be possible that an unexpected ally above S rank had appeared. Some agreed Ming must have encountered the level 0. Awaken time passed, and a man noticed that the Memorial Week had already arrived. the day the first portal opened, and all the demons came out from within. Countless people ended up losing their lives there. Neighbors, friends, and family were all killed there. But they still tried to handle the situation, attending to victims of the impossible. During that time, the sudden appearance of the awakened ones united forces so they could help humanity defeat the demons and restore stability. And as the situation stabilized, they could assist the victims of the demons. That's how the rest home was stabilized, to accommodate the victims. Neighborhood was still the same as he remembered while walking through the streets. He entered a bar where a man soon greeted him. He noticed the other was already drinking a lot. Even alone, his son always said that. True drinking was always done alone. The man sat down, saying that Ho-won had probably just made up an excuse to eat there. Even so, he believed. Ho-won didn't even know what having good taste was. And they talk about how June had been these days. But he didn't know, because June had been busy with her fandom, or something like that. There was no point in raising kids like that. If he could drink with him more comfortably, it could be more fun. They continued drinking and eating, enjoying the moment. In the past, when he started as a hunter, that was a real luxury. Ending the workdays by eating meat and drinking was good. It swept away all his fatigue and eased the sadness of losing his comrades. He spent the night eating and drinking. And at one point, the blonde man asked if the other knew. At the beginning, when he met him, he wanted to kill him. When he started being so bossy. After everything happened, he stopped complaining and became a decent person. But it was still thanks to him that he was able to raise his head and get a good man to marry his sister. They kept him alive because Yogan for a long time. The two began to laugh. And later Haein returned home after school. Kangso immediately felt a powerful aura coming from inside the restaurant. He wondered who could be there at that hour of the night. It was a very powerful, unfamiliar energy from an awakened one. Lim soon noticed that the one inside was her brother, a friend of Won's father. Hae Hong ran into her uncle's arms, who was so happy to see how much she had grown. Lim was surprised, because he appeared without even giving notice. He replied that he decided to take a break during the memorial period. If he had given notice, Lim, or you would have gotten too worried. It was time to visit home and rest, so there he was. You laughed, realizing it really was a good opportunity for them to see each other. Then he introduced Kangso, who was a friend and new employee he had mentioned earlier. Kangso greeted Lim Songju, but Songju immediately noticed. He didn't seem to be a normal Waken. His power was weak, but very pure. In the end, he didn't really seem dangerous, to be honest. In fact, Songju felt an inexplicable warmth in Kangso. Then he realized he got distracted and asked when they planned to go to the rest home. He replied that he was waiting for Haeon to arrive first. In that case, they could hurry to go to the rest home. The whole group gathered in black clothes, and Song Yu complimented Haeon. She was cute in any outfit, actually. With that, they decided to head to the location in question. Lim and Song Yu went to pay their respects to their deceased parents, and Lim asked Haeon to do the job of greeting her grandparents. Even though confused, she did as her mother told her, and later they left. Yovan told Song Yu there was something he wanted to say. They couldn't reveal the source, but there was good news to share. The killer of their parents, Arachnid, the nightmare of Gangwon-do, had been completely eradicated. Songju was shocked by what you said. So, suddenly apparently, the hunter, Lee, was directly involved in its subjugation. It hadn't been made public yet, but it was an announcement to be made soon. So, the name of the spiders taken down by Lee and Kangso was Arachnid. Now the protagonist understood why. He was so happy when he talked about it. When Songhu heard that Lee was personally involved, he was surprised, to the point of starting to cry. Upon realizing that the enemy of his parents was finally gone, time passed, and the day of Haeon's first fashion show arrived. The whole family went to watch, and the children walked the runway. You pointed at Hang right away. She walked by, and you took hundreds of pictures of her on the spot. Even though she was his daughter, she was even more beautiful than usual. Even Kangso admitted she was really cute. The next day, at kindergarten, Everyone heard that Heng had become a model. The children were impressed by how cool that was. She thanked them for the compliments, but still felt a bit shy. Then one of the boys approached and gave her an origami gift. She thanked him because he made it just for her, and the boy got embarrassed. He walked away, while promising he'd support her in the future. At night, the people at the restaurant spent their time watching TV. Lim got furious watching a betrayal scene. Why you look tense? He approached Kangso, asking if he knew why she was acting that way. The protagonist replied. It was obvious why she was so furious. It was impressed that Kangso understood dramas. To that extent, the protagonist started rambling so much that you became even more surprised. They have learned an enormous amount of things. So quickly, even so, Kangso believed it was because it was genuinely interesting. Lim even made a phone call to discuss the soap opera, when suddenly the TV changed to the day's news to celebrate the inauguration of South Korea, with the induction of a Level 0 awakened, a top awakened from around the world, planned to visit Korea. The government expressed great gratitude to them for such consideration. Hanzo was impressed that something like that was really going to happen. He said that all those great talents in one place was truly impressive. But the protagonist was talking about the soap opera itself. Meanwhile, the writer of the drama heard that she'd need to make a sudden addition. It was all of the director's request to add children and new elements she didn't even know what to do with. Something that made so little sense. The director hung up on her after giving her the new info he wanted, which infuriated the writer even more than before. She would make him wait until the end of the drama, and then she would show him very well just how irritated she was. The assistant asked the writer to calm down a bit, since they were having a break. It could jump 5 years ahead in the story. That way they could make the protagonist, Rose's daughter, appear as a little girl. The writer still thought that would be way too sudden. In the narrative, the assistant thought it was actually a good idea. It could spark the audience's curiosity about the identity of the child in question. Then they would reveal the main man of the drama at the crucial moment. That way they could increase audience interest toward the story's end. The main writer ended up agreeing with the assistant because she was a genius. They could make that change now. They just needed a cute child actress. The two went to visit Yu's family restaurant, and Jiun felt that they looked familiar. They ordered 2 bowls of jjigae to eat and recharge their energy. June still didn't know where she had seen those two as she wrote down the order. Suddenly, the writer received a call from the drama's director and got irritated. She answered the call, introducing herself as Lily Choi. Apparently, they were asking for a cake, and Lily agreed. She told her assistant Kim that it was no big deal. They had just asked for a cake. Besides that, alumni recommended a child actress and made the request. June finally remembered that she was the writer, Lily Choi, and the other was her assistant. Their guild owned the broadcasting station company, so they ended up crossing paths. During the program production announcement, the assistant wondered if a model child who was recommended could actually act. Suddenly, Haeyeon came running to talk to her mother, catching Lily's attention because that child was surprisingly adorable. Suddenly, Lily stood up abruptly and begged Lim to give her daughter to her. Later, they all went to a location where the drama was being filmed. You've asked if his daughter was excited, and she agreed. But this time, she was also a little nervous. To be honest, he said that if things got too tense, she could just tell her parents. Hae-hang so replied that she could handle it. She was confident. Kang-so was surprised because she got so excited. Then the director called a break from a scene. They were filming. Yu approached to greet the director and introduce himself to her. But the director walked past him without even acknowledging his presence. Everyone looked a bit shocked, but the woman said they should talk inside. Even so, he didn't understand what her irritating look was about. They all entered the location, and the director introduced herself as the one responsible for the drama. She introduced herself as Ok Goyen and said she heard from Lily about Haeyeon, and above all, that she actually had no experience in anything. Yu agreed that was the case, but his daughter was very determined to make it work. Kangso noticed that. The director was openly trying to dismiss the proposal, all because the girl had no experience in that field. Ok agreed, because everyone starts somewhere. That was true. Even so, Lily insisted they see that child, or she wouldn't write anything else. She was brought in her after. The writer insisted nonstop on that. Child all had to admit that the girl was cute, and above all her appearance was spot on. She could see the reason Lily had chosen the girl, and insisted so much. But using a child model as an actress was something entirely different. She thought the girl had a pretty face, but things wouldn't be that easy. She might think acting was very simple. Because of that, Hulk couldn't let her life's work be at risk over a side decision. With countless problems and criticisms over acting, Hae-young would end up under pressure. It would end with her running off the set in tears. Hulk gave a tense smile as she told Hae-young that life was truly a battle. She could think of it as early life education. Suddenly, the director received a call from director Jean Moyen of the Guild. She didn't understand where the sudden call came from, but even so she asked for just a moment to answer the call she had received. Then she went to answer director Jin's call, asking what he wanted. The woman said she knew that a model child named Hae-young was there, ignoring its confusion. She decided to get straight to the point of the conversation. They had seen her during a model show and ended up liking her, saying they would like to see her more frequently than before. All of a surprise. But Jean continued, saying she shouldn't worry about anything. They had high expectations for the director and her work. She could just get ready for her next project. The director thought that no matter how skilled she was, or how well this project of hers went, she'd still need sponsors for the next production. So if she agreed with Jean, she would try to increase Young's screen time. It might not be much as a form of gratitude, but when the drama ended, they knew she would want paid vacation. With the actors and production team, they would offer a private resort that belonged to the Red Dragon Guild itself. Hearing that surprised OC even more, and she thanked him for the words. Jin added that if Hae-young or her guardian ended up having problems, maybe uncomfortable experiences on set, there would be severe consequences for that. At that, Ok stammered that she understood, and would make sure none of that happened. When the call ended, the director sighed in relief. That was way too close to having problems with Jean and the entire guild over a hasty decision. The child was connected to someone high-ranking in the Red Dragon Guild. Anyway, she might have had a poor first impression, but she still needed to handle things properly. Now, as she was instructed, she returned to the meeting table and commented with a tense smile about Hyen and how she must really enjoy acting, and the girl's smile when called by name. Ok smiled, commenting that she truly was a very clever little girl. Her voice and tone were just too perfect for acting, and she could really feel that. So could you at least start by reading the script before trying to act? We'll try to stay calm. You could have just gone ahead with a request. That way you would guarantee good reward and a wonderful summer trip. But it didn't take long for Hae-young to start acting out the script, surprising up, because she was reading the lines perfectly in the script. 5 years later, the White Rose was walking in the park with her daughter. The child's name was Biol, and they were holding hands. The man found the White Rose and stopped to talk with her. Biol asked who that man was, and the White Rose answered he was a friend. She introduced herself to the so-called friend very politely. However, he was surprised to hear that she was 5 years old. He knelt down and praised her, saying she was just as beautiful as her mother. Belle was surprised because the man suddenly started crying in front of her. But he was just emotional, because Belle was beautiful and moved him. Then Belle herself began to cry too. We cried it. For some reason it made her heart take too. The two kept crying until the directors stopped their performance. The actors praised Hae-yeon because she was able to cry for real. Above all, she also managed to act very well. They couldn't even believe that Hae-yeon was a newcomer. She was impressively good at acting, despite being just a child. Even the director was crying emotionally because Hung was so good. She had finally found a muse who would take her career to start them. Time passes, and Kangso continued his work as a restaurant delivery man. When he returned to the restaurant, you commented on how he always came back quickly. Even so, she suggested he could take things more calmly. The protagonist said. He hurried, because he thought there might be another delivery. Waiting, they offered Kanker some water to drink. After the run, June smiled, thinking about how amazing he was. That delivery should have been kind of far, but he still did it quickly. Even for an A-rank person, he was really good at it. It wasn't just his skill that made Jian like him. It made her wonder how he ended up being ranked F. He seemed like he should be at least ranked C, or maybe even rank B. But still, for some reason, Kangso decided to become a delivery man. Among so many jobs to choose from, he decided to take one like that. Kangso then noticed a familiar energy approaching the restaurant. Someone entered the restaurant, and Juan was surprised to see who it was. It was the people from the Silver Tower, who were visiting the restaurant. The two sat down to even talk. They talked about the case of Flama, the new drug that had spread. They thought they had managed to take down the distributor. Last time, even before it spread, there was always a need for certain items to be used, and all for purposes that weren't exactly proper, especially substances known as illicit drugs. Not only did they affect people, to the point of losing physical pain, but they could also make them forget their mental burdens. And they could even overcome the fear of death with their incredible effects. Since the appearance of demons, that made life harder for hunters. More and more, people were turning to those illicit means. While the immediate effects were impressive, the result wasn't always so. After all, what awaited those people was nothing but ruin. Taking advantage of chaotic times to deal with those things was unforgivable. Kangso heard about those things, wondering what the aura coming from the man's pocket was. It seemed very similar to the energy he had felt at previous delivery locations. With everyone on high alert, the team members couldn't even sleep. The man had come there to eat and was supposed to bring a sample as evidence, but ended up leaving it behind. During the chaos and rush, she was surprised because he had taken a sample of the drug as evidence. He replied that he would get it back on his way, but he couldn't believe how much of a mess his mind was. Right now, still, everyone was busy. Things like that happened. Kangso could understand. It seemed like everything was somehow connected. You appeared, saying a delivery had come in for him to do. It was the perfect timing for the protagonist to go out and do what he wanted. When Kangso put on his mask, the woman at the table, Kim felt something strange. She knew she had seen that somewhere before, but couldn't remember where. But before she could speak to the protagonist, he had vanished in the blink of an eye. The other man didn't understand what had happened, but Kim asked him to wait there a bit. She went out to talk to Kong Su, asking if they had seen each other before. That other day, on the roof of the Eleanor's headquarters. Then he smiled and lowered his mask when he realized she recognized him. But even so, he asked if by chance she wanted to say something. Kim agreed. In fact, she wanted to make a request, if he didn't mind. The Silver Tower was now at its limit, due to the rise of powerful irregulars. With Kinser's abilities, they could save even more people than before. It wasn't just about the Silver Tower, but also many others needed help. If he wanted to keep his identity a secret, she would support him, but she still wanted to beg him to help them save more lives. Kangso reflected in silence for a long moment. Keeping the fact they meant a secret could be somewhat problematic. He had been thinking about how he could repay her for that. They could keep his identity a secret, and he would help with whatever was possible. So Kangso gave her his contact, so she could call if needed. She thanked him and was just watching through the restaurant window, wondering why Kangso was having such a serious conversation, especially with someone from the Silver Tower, and of such importance. She wondered if Kangso was actually a secret agent from the Silver Tower. The protagonist mentioned he couldn't help but overhear her conversation at the table earlier. He was thinking he knew where the people dealing with the drugs. Might be she was surprised to hear that. Meanwhile, at night, a group of men had gathered, sitting in an armchair. One of them punched a cage. Furious, the people from the Silver Tower had ended up discovering him. But instead of doing something, he just ran away without doing anything about it. The man apologized, saying he was ashamed of what he did, but he asked for just one more chance. promising he wouldn't fail this time. Still, his boss didn't believe he could do it. Another one came closer to whisper something, and the boss agreed. Then he decided to offer the man a new mission, to which he thanked him. But he soon heard that the new mission was to become dog food. He was confused. But then the man released several horned dogs at him. Meanwhile, Gangster said he felt something in Kim's companion's pocket. It was one of those drugs they had taken as a sample for their investigation. He had made a delivery to a place where the same energy could be felt nearby. Something seemed strange, but after hearing the conversation, he was sure. That night, Kangso would invade the base and take care of him alone. During the night, the man was counting money after securing some things. The organization's boss was sure he would become the greatest in all of Asia. With his newly awakened powers to control beasts, anything would be possible. And on top of that, he had a rabbit in the cage in his hands. While laughing, he suddenly heard a commotion and asked what was going on. One of the men decided to go out and check what was all about. Then he found a delivery man who suddenly appeared, but a punch flew at his face, and he was sent flying away. That same second, the boss stood up, somewhat shocked by what he had just witnessed. When they looked, Kangso was at the entrance, leaving everyone a bit stunned. The protagonist just said he was a Chinese food delivery man, but that enraged the boss for knowing they had been discovered. He ordered all his men to go after Kangso and kill him. Kangso set the food aside and shocked one of the men. After all, he broke a metal bar like it was a leaf with his bare hands, after throwing the metal bar far away. Without hesitation, the protagonist knocked him out. Next, the others just watched in shock, wondering if he was even human. Everyone charged at Kangso, took them all down with just one swift move. The boss stood up frightened, wanting to know who he was and what he wanted. Maybe he was actually someone from the Silver Tower. After him, Kangso replied. He was just a Chinese restaurant delivery man. Nothing more then. The boss got irritated and gestured to make his magic wolves rise. The boss acknowledged that the protagonist had some skills, but showing off alone without any fear really took courage. Looking at that, Kangso noticed he could control magical beasts. The man stated that no matter how powerful he was, he couldn't handle them all at once. They were all B-level beasts, but together they could take down an S-rank person. But to the man's surprise, the animals laid down like cute puppies. For Kangso, he didn't understand anything. While the protagonist played with the beasts, magical beasts could immediately recognize who was more powerful, and they also showed submission to them instantly, even with his power. He couldn't overcome the instinct of a person. The boss kept wondering what this guy even was to begin with. After all, that guy could be S rank or higher, for whatever reason. When he was pressured, Kamsar stepped back, saying he would surrender. Kamsar said he had heard that many people were suffering because of his drugs. When he started talking about quitting them, the man laughed immediately nervously. He asked what he was even talking about. He had never even seen such drugs to begin with, and was still being accused of nothing. Kangso then turned toward where the money was, noticing something strange. He had sensed the drugs just a moment ago, and suddenly they were gone. When he wondered where it came from, he then noticed a rabbit in the cage. It seemed to be trembling in fear, and as he approached, the man shouted, asking him not to touch that creature or get any closer. Still, Kangso approached and took the rabbit out of the cage. Trembling, he wondered how it was possible for it to be so afraid like that, but he thought there was no need to worry, because he would protect it. Then the rabbit showed an irritated reaction, and the protagonist tried to understand it. It seemed like that rabbit was having several complaints about him. The boss asked what that was supposed to mean. After all, the protagonist said he could control beasts with his power, but he never should have cared about their feelings. All this time, then suddenly, the rabbit looked up, and several things fell on the man. Later, after taking care of the man, Kanko returned home, and Lim asked him to be a bit more careful. After all, he was always bringing animals home like this. Kangso apologized, but Hyung seemed really happy with the rabbit, and Karanja play with. Anyway, she sighed. She would just let Kangso bring the rabbit this time. He replied with a laugh, and promised he would be more careful now. Inside, he felt relieved. He had brought it, because he thought it could be useful. Hei Hong said his name was Papo, and she was very happy with his presence. Seeing her so happy made it worth keeping Papo as a pet. Time passed, and the people from the Silver Tower managed to reach the previous man's location. They told the director. They arrived just as the information had instructed, and they also managed to arrest everyone involved there. But it really was quite an incident. Those guys had already been subdued, especially the leader Gapsik, who was found buried in a pile of his own drugs. They all serve as evidence of his illegal activities. Then they wondered what kind of magic inspector Director Kim had used to discover that. She just replied with a laugh that it was a secret, and she couldn't tell. Anyway, she smiled, wondering if Shield Kangso again. Time passed, and that day, they intended to celebrate Hyun's debut in the drama. They decided to have a celebration and thanked everyone who showed up. Helion promised she would continue to work hard from then on. People around clapped to celebrate the girls' efforts. Ben Lee told you it should be about time for Draken to start. Everyone ran inside the restaurant, and you invited them to watch. They had prepared food, and everyone could enjoy the moment together. The whole group started entering, but then Kanko stopped and turned around. He felt a very powerful energy quickly approaching. It seemed to be something flying in the sky. It was a person flying a plane. By the magnitude of the energy, it should be another 0 rank awakened one. Meanwhile, a woman was irritated talking to Joseph, telling him to stop making noise and being so nervous. If he kept acting like that, he might end up looking like a weirdo. If he really wanted to play something, he should have brought his portable console. Joseph kept grumbling at Celia, because the director had said that if he brought his console again, they would cancel the series on the spot. He hadn't wanted to come. He couldn't care less about the Korean Hunter Alliance. Celia replied that they had no choice in this case. Only a 0 rank could recognize the strength, another at their level. So that's special training. And congratulations were just nominal. In reality, they just wanted to check if the recently awakened guy was strong. Joseph asked what they would do if he really was a powerful awakened one. Celia replied they should just take the opportunity to court him. If that happened, in truth, she didn't think it would be a problem. After all, he needed a partner to share the workload. Joseph agreed that would be very good, but he still didn't think he would be convinced easily. The assistant said he wouldn't have a choice. Even a 0 rank was still human. Joseph remembered that. Messing with his 0 rank awaken was as dangerous as a nuclear bomb. It was no different from provoking one of them. And they had been warned about that. Celia replied that she knew. After all, she wasn't an amateur or anything like that. She shouldn't even worry about it. They could just relax for now. He agreed, even if he wasn't really paying that much attention. Suddenly, Joseph stopped and said he could sense magical beasts. They were Creel. 4 of them approaching the plane they were on. Soon several men gathered in front of Joseph, the person in charge of security. Lieutenant Ronald introduced himself. Ronald reported that the 4 beasts were quickly approaching. The plane they would do their best to fight them, so they could fasten their seatbelts. But Joseph replied that it was all right. He himself was getting bored anyway. Then he used his powers to create a barrier around the plane. At that moment, the beasts slammed into it and complained that they couldn't get through. Joseph immediately held the beast that hit the barrier with his powers. Max, just that one. But all the others were held and crushed with his hands. It didn't take long for Joseph to take care of them, all by himself. One of them started fleeing while screaming, and he could hear it very clearly. But he immediately grabbed it again, finishing the job. Celia said it was over, and Joseph agreed, even if a bit surprised. Deep down, Joseph was just bored with all of this. He hoped Korea could show him something more. Interesting, when the plane landed, Yoon and Lee went to receive the arriving guests. Lee finally met Joseph, the other 0 rank awakened. Yoon shook Joseph's hand, mentioning that it must have been a long journey. He introduced himself as the president of the Awakened Association. Yin Hanjong Joseph and Lee greeted each other. Meeting for the first time, Joseph thought he gave off a refreshing vibe. His aura seemed small at first glance, but he wasn't a weak person. He was simply a refined person who contained his energy very well. He was truly a zero-rank awakened, who knew how to measure his strength. Then Joseph asked him if he happened to like games. Lee didn't understand what he was talking about, but replied that he did like them. But after awakening, he got too busy to play. Joseph said that was a real shame, and suggested they could play something together later. Lee left in the car reflecting on that Joseph guy. At first glance, he emitted an aura worthy of a zero-ranked person. Without a doubt, he was a formidable power player that had to be acknowledged. But he still wondered what that explosion of energy he had felt earlier was. Maybe it was malice, but it must have been something different, something pure, perhaps something unlike what he expected. But suddenly he had suggested a game, and Lee didn't even know what that was about. Lee wondered if it was some kind of modern American joke or something. Then he stopped, and the driver got worried about his frightening aura. That was because Lee was wondering if that so-called game was actually his way of challenging him to a fight. He told the driver it was nothing serious, but asked him to stop the car. The man was confused. After all, they were almost in his house. Lee replied that he needed to make a quick stop. Before that, in fact, he wanted to talk to Kangso about all of this. Meanwhile, the protagonist was playing house with Haeon. Kangso was doing a terrible job as the wife, and Haeon was getting annoyed. He was supposed to act like the lady, and was failing miserably at those things. Haeon once again tried to act as the husband in the game, and Kangso laughed, suggesting that she should be the wife, and play that role instead. Besides that, he asked about the makeup they had, and if it was hers. She replied that they were things she borrowed from her mother to play, all because she was out of her crayons to play with and wanted to substitute them. Kangso was a bit shocked, because she had been painting her face with crayons. Until now he began to say that wasn't a good idea, and suddenly heard his name being called. When he turned around, he found Liam showing up to talk. Liam was holding back laughter as soon as he saw Kangso's fully made-up face. But more important than that, he had something urgent to say. He had met a zero-rank awakened like them, who came from America. It seemed he had been challenged to a duel, and Kangso realized it was an important matter. He asked Haeyoung to go inside to shop for a bit, and she agreed. Once they were alone, the protagonist asked about that awakened person. That person could be hiding behind the post right now. Lee didn't know what he was talking about, and turned around. Immediately, both of them noticed that Joseph was really there, and he smiled upon being seen. Joseph said he used an artifact to completely erase his presence, but even so he was somehow noticed. It was truly impressive. Lee asked if he had been followed all this time. He should consider filing a formal complaint about such rudeness. Joseph apologized. After all, he didn't mean to offend him with something like that. Actually, he was curious about Kangso. That person suddenly appeared, and even managed to find him. He wanted to know what had happened. If he was a friend of Lee's, he must be important. But when he looked more closely, Kangso just looked like a madman. Honestly, especially with all that weird makeup. Right away, he could tell that Joseph was just judging based on appearance. He started getting irritated and interrupted Joseph. Immediately, he accepted the game or match, whatever it was, right then to settle it once and for all. He couldn't wait for them to have a match right now. And this Kangso told Lee that picking unnecessary fights wasn't a good idea, but Lee didn't want to hear that from him. He couldn't let such a rude individual slide. Even so, Kangso didn't see anything wrong in Joseph, just by looking anyway. It wasn't the protagonist's business, and he didn't intend to waste his time. If they were going to duel, it might be better to do it in the land of death. The two stared at each other, but agreed to make it happen. Sometime later, they gathered in the land of death to fight. Joseph said that certainly they wouldn't bother civilians there because of it. That's why Lee had suggested that place to begin with. But there was one thing he actually wanted to ask first, and he asked why he had been called out specifically to fight. There were many other powerful people in the city, and around the world as well. Joseph replied that it might seem weird, but for some reason he liked games. All because of their honesty. Game characters could play constantly, but people like him who were strong from the start had trouble with that, especially when talking about growth. Even so, Lee was different. Lee had clearly been able to change and grow. And not only that, he could not only control his incomplete powers, but they also ended up becoming especially powerful. There was no one as strong as Lee in South Korea. To be honest, there was something in him that made him grow like that. Some important factor. Lee realized that. Joseph's curiosity was manifesting as his power, emanating. Even so, he couldn't reveal the truth about Kong. So just yet, as he stayed silent, Joseph realized he didn't intend to answer or say anything useful. So he used his power to lift a huge chunk of land into the air. Even better, once he defeated Lee, he would uncover his secret. He launched the attack toward Lee, ready to begin the duel. Lee simply split the massive stone with his sword, without difficulty, then charged at his opponent, who defended himself with a barrier. Immediately Lee was surprised by the great power and strength of his shield. Joseph hoped that being able to block his attack wasn't the limit of his power, so he used his powers to grab Lee, which impressed him. It was truly incredible. He had never felt such pressure in someone's powers before he would end up being crushed if things continued like that. It didn't take long for Lee to forcefully break his power. Joseph was shocked because Lee broke his telekineticus with just a shout. But above all, what impressed him was that his attacks actually reached him. It was truly brilliant, a real surprise in his opinion, to be pushed back just by to shock him his attacks. At that point, Joseph was definitely right about Lee and his powers. Meanwhile, Kangso was on the streets with his phone, but couldn't get a signal. It seemed that Lee was still fighting all this time. He had told him to be back before dinner, especially because of the menu, which was cold noodles, special dish for the hot season. Kangso hadn't eaten yet, but you had cooked, so he knew it would be good. He had never realized how gourmet food could be. That good he needed to hurry and bring him back. But then Kangso felt something catch his attention. People started running when the attacks hit the barrier. Something was trying to attack, and everyone got worried that it could be a monster. Those idiots were doing dangerous things. And that irritated Kangso too. I think they had gone that far. Made him decide to go after them and see what was going on. Meanwhile, Joseph and Lee were recovering from the whole fight. Neither of them had fallen. While running toward each other, Joseph was amazed, because he was getting even faster than before. His shield still worked while Lee tried to attack him. He seemed infinite and never stopped functioning when seen that way. Kangso had been watching the two fighting for quite a while. They were caught up in the fight, more than even paying attention to their surroundings. It seemed like knocking both of them out would be the easiest way to handle things. Suddenly, Lee ended up falling, surprising Joseph. He didn't understand what happened. But Kangso also appeared behind him. When he turned around, he barely realized what happened before passing out. When he woke up, Joseph was in his bed, somewhat shocked. Celia asked if he had finally recovered, but the awakened was still a bit tense. He asked what had happened and why he was in the dormitory. But that was exactly what Celia wanted to know. What happened? He was found collapsed in front of his door, covered in blood. All of a sudden, he didn't even know what exactly he had done to end up in that state. Actually, Joseph said he ended up in a fight with Lee, shocking her, because fighting him made him push his powers as far as before. He replied it wasn't that much. They fought for a long time, but he didn't know who the winner was. After all, it wasn't very clear. Suddenly, Joseph sat up and Celia got worried, as he needed to rest. He apologized, but said he had to leave right away and would explain when he got back. Celia just saw him leave, not knowing where he was going this time. For a moment, he felt the power unlike the usual. Then immediately he could tell it was deeply powerful. He wondered if it showed up during the fight. With such power, when Joseph stopped to check his surroundings, he was surprised. Suddenly, Lee also appeared at the location where they had dueled before. But more important than that, Joseph wanted to know what was in front of them. That drew aside from Lee, as they were staring at the place. When they had fought, it was completely destroyed, which left the two of them somewhat shocked. If they fought again, they'd definitely end up in serious trouble. Joseph asked why that ended up happening. He wanted to know who gave him the lectures. Say that Lee replied that they had made Kangso angry. Immediately, Lee covered his own mouth when he realized. He said what he shouldn't have. But Joseph had already noticed that. Kangso was the guy from the restaurant before. That crazy guy. But Lee got furious because he was calling him that. Meanwhile, Kangso sneezed as they started talking about him. Time passed, and Lee was getting more and more annoyed with Joseph. First because he spoke ill of his master, and now because he was being followed. The awakened said he knew Lee intended to meet with Kangso. In that case, he wanted to talk with him while they went together. He felt he owed him a lot. After the things he'd done, seeing the traces that the battle had left, it was clear they involved the city. In the middle of the fight, they were probably caught in the moment and didn't even realize what they were doing. If they hadn't been stopped at that moment, they could have caused more damage. Who knows that? Attacks might have passed through the barrier and hurt civilians. That was something Joseph could never be grateful enough for, that they were stopped in time. That was why he knew Lee should also go see Kangso. Lee gave a subtle smile, before remembering that Joseph had spoken ill of his master earlier. And Joseph offered a laugh, because he hadn't known his true identity before that. Anyway, they ended up hearing voices, talking about the two of them. People praised them because they were two handsome men. The women commented that they must be from another country, but they were all attractive enough to seem like they came out of fashion magazine. Soon they started recognizing the two, because they had seen them on television. The first was the Zero Rank Awakened, and the strongest in the country, Lee Xin. The other was the Zero Rank Awakened from America, Joseph. It didn't take long before they were surrounded by several women, happy to talk to them. They noticed they looked familiar and wanted to talk, because they were all fans. The two ended up being crowded by people, asking for photos and autographs. They both ended up in a complicated situation and hadn't expected it. Joseph asked for permission, then used his powers on Lee, who was surprised. Not just on him, but on himself too. And both flew away from the crowd. Even so, everyone was impressed to see their powers live. Joseph said that should clear the debt he owed, to which Lee just grumbled. Just to be clear, everything about Kangso should be a public secret. The other awakened, assured that there was no need to worry. Later, the two showed up at the restaurant, and Lee bowed deeply to Kangso. He apologized sincerely. He would never again enter such an intense fight like that. And he also thanks him for stopping the two, just in time before something worse happened. The protagonist replied that there was no need to thank him. He just did what had to be done. After all, they were friends. Lee got all emotional, and then Kangso looked at Joseph. He bowed and confessed that he also ended up getting out of control. During the fight, Kangso stared deeply at Lee, who tried not to look too guilty. After all, he had revealed his big secret to the other man. Even so, Joseph mentioned that he could keep secrets very well. After a moment, the protagonist ended up being forced to agree, but he hoped Joseph would be aware of his own strength in the future, besides that he asked him to take good care of Lee, and that they could get along from now on. Joseph laughed, assuring that they were already friends, even if Lee was making a face. Actually, there was something the American wanted to ask him. At that moment, Lee asked Joseph to wait before talking business. At the very least, they should worry about going back to attend the banquet soon. That was something Joseph had completely forgotten. After getting pulled away, Kang Su asked what that welcome banquet was about. Then Lee explained. It was his celebration to welcome the foreign awakened. It was meant to properly receive people, and was a party organized by the government. It would be problematic if the representative from the foreign country, the USA, didn't attend. That's why Lee reminded Joseph to be careful and think about his responsibilities. That made him sigh sadly. He hadn't even had time to talk to Kangso. Even more, because he would end up leaving the very next day. As well then, the protagonist suggested that they could meet. After the banquet, they could talk in nearby park. He could wait for him. That's how they negotiated, and promised to meet after the banquet. Meanwhile, Celia was at the banquet enjoying her moment. She stopped to check the wine and see if it was good enough for high quality. She wondered how Joseph could be so easily followed, only to disappear right afterward. And she wondered where he had gone besides that. Lee also couldn't be seen, and Celia was a little worried. It didn't take long before she saw Lee going up the stairs and found him. Celia approached, commenting that the party was indeed wonderful. But still, she wanted to know how he could spend his time there. All alone, Lee replied that he just needed a bit of fresh air and asked back if Celia wanted something from him. Trying to start a conversation, she smiled and agreed, but began by congratulating him for becoming a zero rank awakened. Even so, she asked if he was really satisfied, living in such a small country. Lee didn't understand what she was suddenly trying to say. Then she decided to go straight to the point. His salary would be 5 times higher or even more if he changed sides and came to work for them. He would have more benefits and money than that. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell. And see you next time on Toby's channel.